Chapter 802. Whether it was Li Yundong, Su Chan, Ziyuan, Zhou Qin, or the fox spirits of the Fox Zen school, none of them realized that it was definitely not a coincidence that Ao Wushuang had appeared behind Chao Kefi. Ever since Ao Wushuang had made up her mind to attack the mystical silver fox, she had been hiding in the shadows and watching Chao Kefi from afar. Although she had countless opportunities to make a move in the past 2 days, Ao Wushuang was most worried about one thing. Was the beautiful woman in front of her the mystical silver fox or Chao Kefi? If it was Chao Kefi, she could take her life at any time. Before the soul of the mystical silver fox completely merged with Chao Kefi's soul, as long as she destroyed her body in furnace, it would be impossible for the mystical silver fox to recover all her strength through the thunder retribution. As long as she couldn't get through the thunder retribution, Wang Yuanshan could easily defeat this former peerless expert, and Li Yundong could even defeat her with one hand. But if she was the mystical silver fox now and Ao Wushuang suddenly made a move, there would only be one result. She would be mercilessly killed by the mystical silver fox or even killed in seconds. Although Ao Wushuang was not afraid of death, she definitely did not want to die for no reason. Most cultivators cherish their lives, and the fox spirit was no exception. The mystical silver fox was a woman who was both affectionate and ruthless, gentle and cruel. She had all the characteristics and temperament of an ambitious and ruthless person, so she would never show mercy to Ao Wushuang because she was also of the same kind and a descendant of the Fox Zen school. This was definitely a queen who would follow her and prosper, and those who would oppose her would die. Therefore Ao Wushuang had been very cautious. She had been quietly observing Chao Kefi these days and did not dare to get too close. Since the completion of the crew, Chao Kefi had been mingling with the post-production of the crew. After communicating with the director, she went to Li Yundong's house with Lu Feier, who had been invited. Of course, it was impossible for Ao Wushuang to appear in front of the mystical silver fox in these days. Otherwise, it would definitely arouse the vigilance of the mystical silver fox. But when she was surprised to find that Chao Kefi had gone to Li Yundong's home, she couldn't help but sigh with emotion. God had given her a chance to test Chao Kefi. If this woman was still Chao Kefi, she would definitely kill her as long as there was a little chance. If this woman was the mystical silver fox, then she had to endure it. She had to endure it until the heavenly thunder came. When she was about to go through the thunder tribulation and was defenseless, she would make a move. When going through the thunder tribulation, cultivators would sacrifice their yang spirit, wander in the rolling clouds of thunder, and accept the baptism of thunder. But at this time, the cultivator's body furnace was the most vulnerable. If there was no protection, she would be defenseless. Even a child could stab the mystical silver fox to death with a knife. The yang spirit of a cultivator came from the condensation and change of the qi of the 5 viscera and 6 bowels. If the yang spirit just floated outside the furnace and did nothing, it would not be affected by any external forces, but it would still lose its strength every day. This was the principle of the way of heaven is to make up for the deficiency, because cultivators had lost the cultivation foundation of the way of man is to make up for the deficiency. This was the simplest philosophical truth that matter determines spirit, and spirit affects matter. Without the material of the body furnace, it was absolutely impossible for the yang spirit, which represented the spiritual power, to improve itself or maintain its strength, because the way of heaven is to make up for the deficiency. If a cultivator wanted to borrow power from the sky during the thunder tribulation, he had to put his yang spirit in the middle of the thunderbolt, let the thunderbolt smash his yang spirit, and then absorb the power of the thunderbolt in the process of gathering again. The reason why the yang spirit could be scattered in the thunder and then gathered again was that the body furnace had a strong recovery ability and self-supply ability. It was also the same reason that if a cultivator's body furnace was destroyed when going through the thunder tribulation, the cultivator's yang spirit would become a tree without roots and water without source. Once the thunder scattered the cultivator's yang spirit, unless he cultivated to the golden immortal realm, it would be impossible for him to gather again, and it would be impossible for him to recover. In the end, there was only one result. His body and soul would be destroyed. From then on, there would be no such person in this world. It wouldn't appear now and it wouldn't appear again in the future. Ao Wushuang held the little girl in her arms. Although she looked at her lovingly, she had been quietly looking at Chao Kefi out of the corner of her eyes, paying attention to the slightest change in her expression. No matter how smart Su Chan was, she would never have guessed that her master would be so bold as to attack the mystical silver fox. She had thought that her master would never come back. Who would have thought that in the blink of an eye, her master would come back? She cried so hard in Ao Wushuang's arms that her tears flowed. After a while, the clothes on Ao Wushuang's chest were wet. Ao Wushuang patted Su Chan on the back and said softly, "Well, how old are you? Don't cry. Aren't you afraid of losing face?" Su Chan raised her head with tears in her eyes and looked at her master pitifully. "Master, you won't disappear without a word again, will you?" Ao Wushuang looked at the disciple in front of her, who had been relying on her for 10 years. She knew that what she was going to do was very likely to die, and it was very likely that she would never see Chaner again. Thinking of being separated from Chaner, Ao Wushuang felt a pain in her heart. She smiled slightly and lied, "No, don't worry. I won't disappear again this time." As she spoke, she suddenly glanced at Chow Kefi's body quickly, and then withdrew her eyes as fast as lightning. No one else noticed her abnormality or thoughts at all. Although Li Yundong felt that the timing of Ao Wushuang's return was a little coincidental, it was just after the New Year's Eve, and the happy atmosphere was strong. Not only him but also everyone else thought that it was a sign that good things come in pairs. No one thought deeply about it. Moreover, even if Sherlock Holmes was reborn, he would never be able to guess Ao Wushuang's thoughts. Li Yundong, Zi Yuan, and the others couldn't have expected it, so naturally Chow Kefi couldn't have noticed it either. Although she relied on a woman's keen intuition and felt that Ao Wushuang had been secretly looking at her, she didn't think too much about it. She even simply thought that Su Chan's master was monitoring her for Su Chan and not letting her get closer to Li Yundong. At this time, Chao Yi, Lu Yuehong, Ling Yu, and the other little foxes of the Fox Zen School also welcomed Ao Wushuang's return with a smile. For a moment, the living room was happy and harmonious, talking and laughing. Li Yundong nodded to Ao Wushuang with a smile, then turned to Chow Kefi and Lu Feier and said with a smile, "Have you had breakfast? Why are you here so early?" Before Chow Kefi could speak, Lu Feier, who was standing to one side, said with a smile, "I've long heard that you are good at cooking, so we've been hungry for 3 days and 3 nights just to empty our stomachs and come here to have a big meal. Hey, Immortal Li, you won't be so stingy that you won't entertain us, will you?" This playful joke made everyone laugh. Li Yundong also said with a smile, "It just so happens that there are some flour cakes steamed last night at home. You can eat some in the morning to fill your stomachs. Otherwise, when you really eat a big meal later, your stomachs will be broken." Lu Feier made a face and said, "Who wants to eat such a simple and ordinary thing? We want to have a big meal, a Manchu and Han imperial feast." Chow Kefi, who was standing to one side, pulled her with a smile and said, "Hey, are you crazy? Don't make trouble." Li Yundong shook his head and said, "Manchu and Han imperial feast? I don't have that." Lu Feier also nudged Chow Kefi with her elbow and then said to Li Yundong seriously, "You can have that." Li Yundong chuckled and said seriously, "I really don't have that." Lu Feier immediately put on a resentful look and said, "If you don't even have that, then what's the point of having a big meal? How dare you say that your cooking skills are good?" Li Yundong couldn't help laughing. "I've never praised my cooking skills in front of you. Who did it?" As he said this, he couldn't help looking at Su Chan and Zhou Qin. In his opinion, it was probably one of them who had said this when they were accompanying Chow Kefi and Lu Feier's crew in Hainan. Unexpectedly, Su Chan and Zhou Qin both felt guilty at the same time. They turned their heads away and didn't dare to look at Li Yundong. Li Yundong was so angry that he laughed. "Well, both of you have a share." Lu Feier, who was standing to one side, didn't care about this. She reached out and grabbed Li Yundong generously, looking as if she was determined to cling to him. She said unrelentingly, "I don't care. Anyway, you have to treat us well today. We can't eat outside. We have to cook for ourselves. Besides, I want to have a Manchu and Han imperial feast." Everyone knew that Lu Feier was joking, so they all looked at Li Yundong with a smile, waiting to see him make a fool of himself. Li Yundong pretended to be embarrassed and said helplessly, "There's no Manchu and Han imperial feast. Do you want a Manchu and Han imperial feast?" Lu Feier couldn't help laughing and said, "Bah, it's so smelly and dirty. I don't even have an appetite." Li Yundong was overjoyed. "No appetite? That's good." As he said this, Li Yundong waved to the crowd and said, "Kids, no one wants to have a Manchu and Han imperial feast. Let's go do what we should do." Everyone laughed and agreed. Lu Feier immediately stamped her feet and said angrily, "You're so annoying. You're all bullying me." As she said this, she turned her face and looked at Chow Kefi pitifully. "Sister Chow, look, your little She wanted to say that her little sweetheart was bullying her, but when Chow Kefi heard the word, she suddenly shivered and immediately pinched Lu Feier's arm hard with her fingers, forcing her to swallow her words. Lu Feier felt the pain in her arm and swallowed her words. She changed her words and said, Your little abacus is not working. People don't want to buy it. Alas, I thought you had a lot of face, but it turns out that you can't even have a Manchu and Han imperial feast. Let's go. I'm so disappointed and sad. Let's go back and eat cornbread. A big star said that she wanted to eat cornbread when she went back. Who would believe it? Chow Kefi was still in a state of shock from Lu Feier's sudden attack just now, and a layer of sweat appeared on her back. She secretly glared at Lu Feier, then deliberately sighed and said, "Yes, then let's go back first." Women were born to be excellent actors, and Chow Kefi was also a person who rolled around in the crowd all day long. She was good at dancing, and her acting skills were LV99. She was no less than any professional actor. Her words were full of resentment. If someone didn't know her well, they would think that she was really unhappy and wanted to leave. Li Yundong naturally knew that they were talking to themselves and joking, but Ao Wushuang didn't know. She saw that Chow Kefi had just arrived and was about to leave, and it was not easy for her to have an opportunity to deal with her face to face. She wanted to test her again, so how could she let Chow Kefi go so easily? Ao Wushuang's heart tightened and she immediately blurted out, "Isn't it just a Manchu and Han imperial feast? I can do it." Her words shocked everyone. Li Yundong and Ziyuan both looked at Ao Wushuang in shock. She dared to say that she could make a Manchu and Han imperial feast? No way. As the saying goes, a real person doesn't show his face, but isn't this too much? They hadn't seen that Ao Wushuang looked like a super chef who could cook a Manchu and Han imperial feast before. Moreover, in today's world, how many chefs would dare to say that they could cook a Manchu and Han imperial feast? Other people didn't know if Ao Wushuang could cook it, but Su Chan knew it very well. Her master, who even had to buy sesame seed cakes on the street to eat, could cook a Manchu and Han imperial feast? She would laugh her teeth out. Su Chan stared at Ao Wushuang with her eyes wide open. She looked as if she had seen a ghost, and her face was full of disbelief. Seeing Su Chan's expression, Ao Wushuang couldn't help but glare at her and give her a look as if to say, "You can believe this." Su Chan immediately shook her head slightly and gave her a look back. "I really don't believe this." Chapter 803. Ao Wushuang was obviously angered by the little girl. Just now, she felt sorry for Su Chan, and her reluctance to part with her suddenly disappeared. She glared at her and gritted her teeth. "This evil disciple, you can't let me go at this moment. You bastard." However, when Su Chan saw Ao Wushuang glaring at her, she immediately put on a righteous and outspoken expression, as if she was saying Plato's classic saying, "I love my teacher, but I love the truth even more." Ao Wushuang naturally understood this expression. She was flustered and exasperated. "Evil disciple, screw the truth. If the mystical silver fox recovers all her strength, we will all be finished together." What truth? But these words couldn't be said clearly. Seeing that she couldn't scare Su Chan, Ao Wushuang had to bite the bullet and say, "I've seen two chefs before, and they left the recipes of the Manchu Han imperial feasts. I still remember them." Ao Wushuang was not lying. She had inherited the long and fine tradition of the Fox Zen school. She liked to borrow books from everywhere, just like the mystical silver fox who had asked for masters everywhere in the past, but had been repeatedly rejected. In a fit of anger, she either transformed into someone else and secretly learned from them, or simply sneaked into the library and stole the books. After she was forced to separate from Wang Yuanshan, her temperament had changed greatly. She had changed from the naive little fox to the mature and cold Ao Wushuang. In order to become stronger, she had stolen all kinds of scriptures from all over the world, and she had read every book she had caught. Ao Wushuang had once looted the sutra pavilion of some small sects in private and almost swept away all the ancient books inside. Although today's society was in the age of chaos, it was also an era of knowledge explosion. Even the number of scriptures in small sects was not small, far exceeding that of the ancient big sections. These ancient books ranged from astronomy to geography, including the recipes and cooking methods of the Manchu Han imperial feast. Although Ao Wushuang was very uninterested in cooking, she had a photographic memory. After flipping through these books, she could still remember some of them. If Li Jiandong insisted that she recite them, she could recite some of them so she wouldn't be talking nonsense. But Li Jiandong didn't mean that. What a joke. The Manchu Han imperial feast? Although he was not a serious chef, he knew that the Manchu Han imperial feast represented the highest level of food culture in China and even the whole world. Not to mention anything else, just the Manchu Han imperial feast alone had 54 kinds of southern dishes and 54 kinds of northern dishes. There were a total of 8 dishes, which was enough to make Li Yundong go bankrupt. Even if he was making a lot of money from the Desanxian, He couldn't afford to squander like this. What kind of dishes were these 8 dishes? Just the tea that they drank at the beginning of the meal was one of the top 10 most famous teas in China, the Shifeng tea from West Lake Longjing. West Lake Longjing was mainly produced in 5 places: Shifeng, Longjing, Yunqi, Hupao, and Maijiawu. Among them, Shifeng's tea was the best. There was a saying, the most famous tea in the world is Longjing, and the best Longjing is in Shifeng. And Shifeng village, which produced Shifeng tea, was known as the world's #1 tea village. The Shifeng tea it produced was even more famous at the state banquet. Li Yundong was a tea house owner, so he naturally knew how expensive Shifeng Longjing was. Even the top-grade Huangshan Maofeng tea collected by Ziyuan was a grade lower than this Shifeng tea. However, such a famous tea, which was much more expensive than gold, was only an appetizer tea for the Manchu Han imperial feast. In other words, this tea was used to rinse the mouth. This kind of tea was only used to rinse the mouth. Who the hell could afford to be hurt? The 5 spices pigeons, first-class official swallows, braised deer tendons in clay pot, braised shark skin with scallions, sliced suckling pig, changchun deer whip soup, tianxiang abalone, filong roe deer spine, panda crab shrimp, shandong sea cucumber, hericium mushroom braised shark fin, steamed bear paw, steamed deer tails. There was nothing that didn't fly in the sky, walk on the ground, or swim in the sea. Regardless of how much energy and time it took to make these dishes, just gathering the ingredients for these dishes was enough to make Li Yundong suffer. To make the Manchu Han imperial feast, one should never get tired of eating fine dishes. The ingredients were almost endless. If they were really meticulous, it was estimated that after 100 dishes were made, Li Yundong would have to go begging on the street with the fox spirits. They wouldn't even be able to celebrate the new year. Seeing the greedy eyes of Su Chan and the little foxes lighting up at this time, Li Yundong couldn't help but shiver. He quickly said to Ao Wushuang, "Don't talk about the Manchu Han imperial feast. Lu Feier and Sister Chow are joking with you." As he said this, he quickly turned his face and kept winking at Lu Feier and Chow Kefi. His expression seemed to be saying, "If you dare to say no, I will go back to your house. If I can't eat you up, I won't be surnamed Li." Seeing Li Yundong's expression, Lu Feier and Chow Kefi couldn't help laughing. Lu Feier wanted to continue teasing him, but she was pulled by Chow Kefi and said, "Feier loves to joke. How could I really make a Manchu Han imperial feast? Li Yundong, if you really want to make it, I can't afford to wait. I'm afraid that by the time you make it, I'll be starving to death." The craftsmanship of the Manchu Han imperial feast was extremely complicated. It was a huge project that required a lot of manpower and material resources. Even the top hotels in today's society would find it extremely difficult to complete the Manchu Han imperial feast on their own, let alone Li Yundong, who had just become rich. If Li Yundong and Ziyuan were to cook it alone, even if they had the skills, after cooking 108 dishes, everyone would probably go straight to the Mid-Autumn Festival and directly wish Chow Kefi and Lu Feier a Happy New Year. Li Yundong saw that Chow Kefi finally gave him face and did not join in the uproar. Otherwise, if the little foxes didn't know the immensity of heaven and earth and started making trouble, he would really want to cry but have no tears. Alas, thinking about living with these lawless girls all day long and being on guard against them all day long, it really gave him a headache. Li Yundong secretly breathed a sigh of relief. As long as they didn't eat the Manchu Han imperial feast, everything could be discussed. He smiled and welcomed Chow Kefi and Lu Feier. "Don't just stand there. Sit down." Chow Kefi was a little reserved and carefully sat down on one side of the sofa, while Lu Feier was much more generous. After she sat down, she looked around curiously. At a glance, she saw Su Chan standing in the living room in her rather revealing pajamas. She couldn't help but smile and say, "Su Chan, did you just get up?" Only then did Su Chan come to her senses. When she heard the sound of Ao Wushuang coming back, she immediately rushed out regardless of everything. Only now did she realize that something was wrong. She exclaimed and immediately blushed. She covered her face and eyes and turned around like a headless fly. When Lu Feier saw her like this, she found it interesting. When she saw that Su Chan was about to enter her room, she suddenly shouted mischievously, "Hey, you're in the wrong room." How could Su Chan come to her senses? In a daze, she subconsciously turned around and went into Li Yundong's room. In the little girl's mind, since she had entered the wrong room, the other room would not be wrong. Lu Feier had seen Li Yundong come out of his room before. Now that Su Chan was in a panic, she also turned around and rushed into his room. She couldn't help but let out an "ong" and looked at Li Yundong meaningfully. It seems that some people are a feast for the eyes. They are very full. No wonder they don't want to greet us. When everyone saw Su Chan's appearance, they couldn't help laughing. Li Yundong also didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He thought to himself, did Lu Feier take the wrong medicine today? Why did she target me as soon as she entered the room? Who did I provoke? Sometimes women should not be provoked, especially beautiful women. Although Li Yundong didn't know why Lu Feier kept picking on him as soon as he entered the room, he decided that a good man doesn't fight with a woman. So he greeted Lu Feier politely and honestly. Lu Feier smiled. But Li Yundong didn't know that Lu Feier had indeed come to him today, not for anything else, but to vent her anger for his sister Chao. What? Where did the anger come from? What a joke. She suddenly appeared in the crew, then suddenly disappeared, then suddenly appeared again, and finally suddenly disappeared without saying a word. Did she really think that she was the dragon god hero? Li Yundong made Sister Chao infatuated with him all day long. She seemed to have lost her soul when she couldn't see Li Yundong. Although a beautiful woman was getting more and more beautiful day by day, she was also getting thinner and more haggard day by day. Moreover, the most important thing was, Li Yundong had promised to invest in the crew on behalf of Zhao Yuzhen, but where was the money now? I can understand that she disappeared. Li Yundong, you have your own things to do. If a man always revolves around a woman all day long, it will be looked down upon. I can understand that you are busy with your career, but you have to see the money you promised, right? Yes, the film was finished and the filming was done, but did the post-production not need money? The post-production publicity costs money, doesn't it? Lu Feier saw that Chao Kefi had been worried about money these days. She had been frowning all day long and begging her grandfather and grandmother to kneel down to the investors. Lu Feier was furious. She said to Chao Kefi in private, I guess this heartless guy must have forgotten about it. Chao Kefi didn't know about the popularity of Desanxian. At the beginning she didn't expect Li Yundong to invest a large sum of money in it, so she didn't take it to heart. After all, Li Yundong had helped her solve the problem of the second female lead, which could be considered as ending her worry. But, no money was no money. This was the weakness of the crew which could not be made up for by technology. The emperor didn't send hungry soldiers. Who would work with you without money? When Chao Kefi's mind was not occupied by the mystical silver fox, she was really worried about these things, but she didn't want to go to Li Yundong. She always felt that it was very shameful and hurt her self-esteem to beg him in front of this little enemy. But Lu Feier, who was beside her, couldn't stand it anymore. What? Embarrassed? This is the money he promised? Okay, you're embarrassed. I'll do it. I'll scold him and see if he gives it to me. When Lu Feier said this, Chao Kefi's face turned pale. She quickly held her down so that she wouldn't go out and cause trouble for herself. In fact, Lu Feier was just saying it casually. How could she dare to scold this living immortal? Her words were fierce, but when they met, although her words were very targeted, she could go around the world. Even someone as smart as Li Yundong didn't know the real purpose behind Lu Feier's words. Lu Feier's words were just to provoke Li Yundong to see if he had any guilt. But when she saw that there was no guilt on Li Yundong's face, she suddenly understood in her heart, this heartless guy really forgot everything. Lu Feier was a little angry. She was about to test Li Yundong again when she saw Li Yundong smiling at Ling Yu and saying, Why are you standing there? Go and pour tea for the guests. As if waking up from a dream, Ling Yu eagerly went into the kitchen to pour tea. After a while, she carried a plate with 2 cups of steaming hot tea on it. She passed by Ao Wushuang and walked towards Chao Kefi. Ao Wushuang, who was beside her, had an idea. She secretly flicked her finger and a gust of wind shot towards Ling Yu's feet, hitting her numb tendons. Ling Yu let out a cry of alarm and tilted her body. The hot tea on the tea tray splashed towards Chao Kefi's face. Chapter 804. Tea wasn't usually brewed with water that had just been boiled. The tea that Ling Yu was holding was brewed with water that was around 85 degrees Celsius. Even though it wasn't 100 degrees Celsius, it would still be very unbearable if it was splashed onto a person's body. In Ao Wushuang's opinion, if it were her, she would definitely subconsciously use magic to control the cup of water that had been splashed over. Her purpose was also very simple. If Chao Kefi was already a mystical silver fox, she would definitely subconsciously block the cup of boiling tea in such an unexpected situation. However, if Chao Kefi was not the mystical silver fox with mystical luck now, it would be strange if her skin was not peeled off if she was scalded by the water. But if Chao Kefi was really not a mystical silver fox, then Ao Wushuang would be even happier, because it meant that there would be many opportunities for her to make a move, not just on the day of the Thunder Retribution. No one next to them had expected that Ling Yu would make such a mistake at this moment. They were all stunned for a moment. They watched the cup of hot tea being splashed toward Chow Kefi, and Chow Kefi herself seemed to be scared silly and did not react at all. Everyone could only watch the cup of water tilt little by little. The hot tea in the cup splashed out like a slow motion, splashing toward Chow Kefi's face and chest little by little. For a moment, even if someone wanted to make a move, it was too late. Chow Kefi was about to be drenched by the flying tea, but at this moment, the tilted teacup suddenly stopped in mid-air, and the water that splashed out suddenly froze as if the scene had been fixed in place. Everyone was dumbfounded, but they quickly recovered from their shock and turned their gazes to a place not far away. Li Yundong stretched out a hand as if he was grabbing something in the air. His 5 fingers closed slightly, and an invisible huge jinchi, like invisible tentacles, grabbed the spilled tea and the tilted teacup in the air. Li Yundong was not the closest person to Chow Kefi, but he was the one with the highest cultivation here. He had reached the Jinshin phase. With a move of his mind, heaven and earth would move. With a move of his jinchi, it was really easy for him to control things within 10 meters of him. Li Yundong waved his hand, and the boiling tea flew into his palm, gathering into a round rolling water ball. When everyone saw that he was so skillful in controlling the water outside his body, they were really dazzled and their hearts beat fast. Lu Feier was even more tongue-tied. She felt as if she was watching the special effects of a movie in a cinema. Her beautiful eyes were fixed on Li Yundong's hands, as if she wanted to see what kind of magic they had. Ao Wushuang hadn't expected that Li Yundong would help Chow Kefi at this moment. She thought it was a pity, but she was the first to exclaim. She said with concern, "Li Yundong, are you okay?" Chow Kefi's face was full of shock and fear. She glanced at Li Yundong and forced a smile. "I'm fine. I owe you another favor." Li Yundong smiled and said, "What are you talking about? It's just a piece of cake. You don't have to be so polite." As he said this, he glared at Ling Yu and lowered his voice to scold her in a low voice. "What's wrong with you?" Ling Yu was also confused. She unconsciously rubbed her feet with her hands and whispered with a strange expression, "I don't know. I suddenly felt a little pain in my feet." Li Yundong frowned slightly. He knew that if a cultivator suddenly felt pain somewhere, it was either because he had been attacked or because his qi was not running smoothly. In other words, there might be something wrong with his meridians and he might be possessed by the devil. Sometimes, ordinary people would suddenly have a feeling of shortness of breath in their chest or other places. This was the sudden obstruction of their qi. If this happened to a cultivator, it was an extremely dangerous signal. However, this kind of situation mostly happened when they were out of luck. Otherwise, with a cultivator's strong ability to adjust their qi, it was unlikely that this kind of situation would occur. Li Yunyang stretched out his hand and gently pressed it on Ling Yu's shoulder. His aura was now vigorous and powerful, which was rare in the world. Even if he pressed a finger on her body through her clothes, he could immediately detect the flow of qi in her body. However, Li Yundong immediately found that there was nothing unusual about Ling Yu's body. He couldn't help but be stunned, and his frown deepened. Just as he was about to ask again, Chow Kefi smiled and said, "It's okay. I'm fine, aren't I? How can a person not make mistakes, right?" She said this to Ling Yu, and Ling Yu nodded gratefully. Hearing Chow Kefi's words, Li Yundong didn't pursue the matter further. He nodded to Ling Yu and said, "Go make 2 more cups of tea. Pay attention next time." As he said this, he raised his other hand holding the flowing water ball, and the tea was thrown out of the window like a flying ball. As soon as he threw it out, he heard a scream coming from outside. It was obvious that someone had been tragically scalded. The corner of Li Yundong's eyes twitched, and he felt a little embarrassed. Everyone was also shocked and horrified. They poked their heads out one after another, only to see a middle-aged man holding a young and beautiful woman in one hand and hurriedly taking off his wig with the other. He looked at the tea and tea leaves on the wig, stamped his feet, and cursed. When everyone saw him looking up, they immediately shrank their heads back and tried hard to hold back their laughter, not daring to make a sound. Li Yundong coughed dryly and smiled dryly. "This is a mistake, a mistake. How can people not make mistakes, right?" Ling Yu, who was standing to one side, quickly nodded. What a coincidence. She had made a mistake and the leader had made a mistake with her. Was he going to smooth things over for her? It couldn't be, right? Li Yundong was also extremely embarrassed. He had casually thrown the tea out, which was naturally not a good behavior, but it couldn't be such a coincidence that someone happened to pass by downstairs. There was such a small chance that they would bump into each other? At this time, Lu Feier couldn't help covering her mouth and laughing. "Well, I'm going to complain." Chow Kefi, who was standing to one side, quickly pulled her back and glared at her. "Don't make trouble. This happened because of me. It's not Li Yundong's fault. Where do you want him to throw the tea? Do you want him to throw it in your face? Lu Fair quickly waved her hand and said, Amit Ba, it's better for you to die than for me. You'd better continue to pour the tea on the man downstairs. He doesn't look like a good person to me. Li Yundong shook his head and said with a wry smile, I was lazy and didn't go to the bathroom to pour the tea. Alas, I'll go down and apologize to him later. Ziyuan, who was standing to one side, nodded secretly and thought to herself, Li Yundong's cultivation is so high now that he has the power to move mountains and fill seas. Now that he has done something wrong, he can still put down his pride and apologize to an ordinary person. This is really rare and commendable. Not bad, not bad. But as she was thinking about it, she suddenly heard a loud knock on the door. A man outside the door shouted, F*CKU who poured tea just now. Come out. Everyone immediately looked at each other. Well, the owner of the matter had come to find them. Hearing his harsh words, Zhou Qin frowned and said coldly, Master, I'll go open the door. Li Yundong knew that Zhou Qin was impulsive. Once she opened the door, she would definitely say something bad and the two sides would definitely quarrel. He quickly persuaded her, Forget it, I'll go open the door and apologize. It's not a big deal. When he walked over and opened the door, he saw a middle-aged man in a suit and leather shoes. His head was as bald as a taklamakan, and there was not a single strand of hair on his head. He still had one arm around a coquettish young woman with heavy makeup next to him, and the other hand was holding a wet wig. The man was looking at him with a hostile expression. The middle-aged man could tell that he was a government official just by looking at his face. He was used to bossing people around. Now that he was in such a sorry state in front of his little lover, he was furious and naturally became even more domineering and unreasonable. He was originally ready to rush to spend the night with his little lover in the golden house, but he didn't expect that a cup of boiling tea would fall from the sky. Not only did it burn him to the point that he screamed, it even scalded his tongue so much that it became soft. All of his sexual desire was gone. The middle-aged man's face was full of anger, and his fingers almost poked Li Yundong's face. Did you pour the tea from the window just now? Seeing that he was aggressive, Li Yundong frowned secretly, but he still smiled and said, I'm sorry. It's my fault. I'll apologize to you. Li Yundong apologized gracefully. The eyes of the little lover next to the middle-aged man lit up. She just looked at him playfully. She wanted to grow hooks in her eyes and hook the man in front of her into her stomach. The middle-aged man glanced at Li Yundong and felt ashamed in his heart. Looking at the faint smile on Li Yundong's mouth, he felt that it was more and more dazzling. He couldn't help but say angrily, if an apology is useful, what do we need the police for? I'll spit on you and then I'll apologize to you, okay? As he said this, he opened his mouth and really spat at Li Yundong. Li Yundong was stunned. He had never seen such a person before. The zhenqi in his body automatically rebounded and immediately bounced back the saliva. The middle-aged man's vision blurred, and his eyes were suddenly covered by his own saliva. He really couldn't figure out why his face was blurred when he spat at Li Yundong. Behind Li Yundong, Su Chan and the others saw that he was aggressive and unforgiving, and they felt disgusted, especially when they saw him spit at Li Yundong. However, when they saw that Li Yundong had unconsciously rebounded his spit, they immediately looked at the middle-aged man wiping his face in embarrassment with his hands and laughed. The middle-aged man almost exploded. He flew into a rage and roared, What the hell are you laughing at? If you laugh again, I'll... He glanced over Li Yundong and suddenly felt as if he had been struck by lightning. He was tongue-tied and couldn't believe his eyes. Oh my God, there are so many beautiful women in this room. And there are so many beautiful women. As the saying goes, comparisons are odious and comparisons are odious. When the middle-aged man first saw his little lover, he felt that she was really beautiful. He had tried everything he could to coax her into agreeing to be with him for a while. But now, seeing so many beautiful women, the middle-aged man felt that he was hugging a chicken or a dog. He couldn't wait to kick this woman, then snatch all the women in the room and let himself have fun with them. As the saying goes, beauty makes one dizzy. Beauty is the most terrible thing in the world. The so-called land of tenderness is the grave of heroes, let alone a middle-aged man who was full of material desire and greed. There was a strange light in the middle-aged man's eyes. A thought flashed through his mind and he laughed maliciously. Chapter 805. The middle-aged man's lust was aroused, and his IQ was severely reduced. He didn't know who he was provoking, and for a moment he forgot to think about a very serious matter. Could a man with so many beautiful women around him be an ordinary person? The middle-aged man glanced at Li Yundong coldly, wiped the saliva off his face, and turned away with a gloomy face. The beautiful woman next to him didn't care about seducing Li Yundong at this time. She naturally knew the character of the middle-aged man beside her, especially when she saw the way he looked at the women behind Li Yundong. Her heart skipped a beat, and she secretly understood what was waiting for her. She was truly envious and jealous of these women. She was envious that they were so beautiful that they had stolen her limelight and outshone her. She was envious that they could stand beside such an outstanding man while she could only accompany this fat, big-eared, and disgusting bald middle-aged man. What she hated was that it was so infuriating to compare with others. It seemed that she couldn't avoid being dumped by this middle-aged man. It was a pity that she had been pretending to be a snake for so many days. It hadn't been easy for him to agree to pay a big price for her, but it seemed that it had been ruined. It was all these women's fault. Damn it. The more the woman thought about it, the angrier she became. She couldn't help but curse in a low voice, "Bitch." Sometimes some women were like this. Whenever they saw a beautiful woman who had stolen their limelight and ruined their plans, they would indiscriminately call her an vixen first. The reason was the same as shooting her first and then trying her. This sentence was not specifically aimed at anyone, but it was also aimed at all the women in the room. However, the woman hadn't expected that her words would hit the nail on the head. There were indeed many vixens in the room. Su Chan and Ao Wushuang had been in the secular world for a long time, so they were used to being scolded, so it didn't matter to them. However, the other people of the Fox Zen school couldn't stand such scolding. Ling Yu, the little fox, was the first to jump out with an unhappy face. "What did you say? Who are you scolding?" The woman sneered. "Who are you scolding? Whoever deserves to be scolded." Ling Yu's little face turned red. She gritted her teeth and clenched her fists, wishing she could punch him. The other little foxes were also filled with righteous indignation. Chow Kefi's face was also filled with indignation, and her body was even trembling slightly. Chow Kefi was extraordinarily beautiful. Ever since her appearance began to attract attention, she had been constantly called a vixen, but she was already used to all of this. But at this time, when Chow Kefi suddenly heard this phrase again, she didn't know why, but a ball of anger burned in the depths of her heart. She didn't know where this emotion came from, why she was so angry. It was as if when she heard this word, she gnashed her teeth, wishing that she could destroy everything in front of her. At this time, the attention of everyone else in the room was focused on this woman. Few people noticed Chow Kefi's abnormality. Even Ao Wushuang did not notice it. In her opinion, it was normal to be angry when someone called her a coquettish fox. When she was scolded by the people in the world of cultivation, she wanted to draw her sword and kill them. Only Lu Feier felt a little strange. In their line of work, it was common for them to be scolded. Sometimes, even though she hated the person in front of her, she had to force herself to cheer up and smile. If being scolded like this made her so angry, then they might as well not live anymore. They could just buy noodles and strangle themselves to death. Lu Feier reached out to grab Chow Kefi's hand, but as soon as she touched her skin, she felt a bone-chilling cold. An inexplicable chill instantly invaded her body, almost freezing her blood. Lu Feier shivered and was shocked. She immediately retracted her hand, widened her eyes, and whispered to Chow Kefi, "Sister Chow, why is your hand so cold?" Chow Kefi was stunned. She turned her head to look at Lu Feier, and the inexplicable anger in her eyes slowly subsided. She raised her hand with a blank face and said, "My hand is cold?" Lu Feier said in surprise, "Yes, I thought I was touching ice just now." As she spoke, she reached out to touch Chow Kefi's hand again, but when she touched it again, she suddenly found that Chow Kefi's hand was ordinary and there was no chill at all. Lu Feier was surprised. "Impossible. I was just..." Chow Kefi also looked at Lu Feier with a strange expression. "Are you sure? I'm not sick." As she said this, she reached out to touch Lu Feier's forehead and said, "Are you sick?" Lu Feier slapped her hand away and said, "Bah, you're the one who's sick." While they were talking in low voices, Ling Yu, who was outside, was also persuaded to come back by Li Yundong's gaze. Li Yundong didn't want to cause trouble, so he closed the door with Ling Yu and the others and went back to his room, ignoring the two people outside the door. The middle-aged man was still holding the woman next to him with one hand, looking at Li Yundong's door with flickering eyes. In his opinion, Li Yundong's low-key and concession were a sign of weakness. He became more and more sure of his thoughts. He smiled coldly, turned around and picked up his mobile phone. Li Yundong didn't take the matter in front of him to heart at all. After he returned to his room, he greeted Chow Kefi and Lu Feier calmly. Under Lu Feier's repeated hints, Li Yundong finally remembered what he had promised Chow Kefi before. Although he had a good memory, he had a lot of things to do, and one thing was bigger than the other. Compared with these things he had encountered, the promise he had made to Chow Kefi was really a small matter, although this matter had been a headache for Chow Kefi for several days. Li Yundong said to Chow Kefi with a guilty and apologetic face, "Sister Chow, I'm really sorry. These days I really have a lot of things to do and I forgot about this matter. I will definitely pay you back later." Chow Kefi was not willing to take Li Yundong's money. She said with embarrassment, "It's not easy for you to make money. Keep it for yourself. I can find a way to get money." At this time, Zhou Qin heard their words and came over with a smile. "President Chow, don't be polite with my master. If it's not easy for him to make money now, there is really nothing in the world that is easy to make money." Lu Feier and Chow Kefi looked at her curiously and asked in unison, "What's wrong?" Zhou Qin chuckled and explained the current situation of Desanxian. Only then did the two women suddenly understand. A large group of Japanese believers had come all the way to Tianan City to be rich. If it was not easy to make money, then there was really nothing that was easy to make money. Lu Feier's eyes widened in surprise. "Is the business of Desanxian so good now? Is it so exaggerated?" Zhou Qin smiled and said, "You'll know when you go there another day." As she said this, she smiled and said to Chow Kefi, "Don't feel sorry for my master's money. Now he doesn't know how to spend the money he has earned. It's a waste to put the liquid funds in the bank. You know, now that prices have risen so much, saving money in the bank will benefit bankers and the rich. The longer you save it, the more you will lose. I also want to persuade Li Jiandong to take out the money to continue building a tea house or invest in other industries." Zhou Qin was born in an official family, so she naturally understood the ways of business and politics very well. She had always believed in the idea that in today's society, if you wanted to make money and make a lot of money, you had to meet two conditions, and these two conditions were indispensable. These two conditions were, first, you had to have money. Without money you really couldn't do anything. You could only work for others. Others ate meat, you ate onions, others ate vegetables, and you drank soup. As the saying goes, it is difficult to be a hero without a penny. At that time, Li Jiandong was so worried about the starting capital that he wished he could pawn it himself. Any industry needed investment at the beginning. Even if you wanted to get something for nothing, you still had to invest money first. Money was a prerequisite for becoming rich and making a lot of money. No matter how good a person's business skills were, if he didn't give him a penny, he would still be helpless. This was the saying, "A clever woman can't cook without rice." But money alone was not enough. The second point was, you had to have connections. Without connections, no matter how rich you were just a headless fly. If you took the money and threw it randomly, it was very likely that you would lose everything. With connections, you could ensure that your investment would not be easily wasted. Li Jiandong could now be said to have met the two major conditions to become rich. He now had 6 figures in his hands. Although it was not a lot, it was finally a starting capital. This money was equivalent to a snowball. As long as the investment was accurate, it would immediately produce a snowball effect, rolling bigger and bigger until it became a behemoth in the end. Although investing in the film and television industry was quite risky, if the investment was successful, the benefits would also be rich. Although Li Jiandong's investment did not account for a large share, this show had the appeal of Lu Feier, so it was estimated that it would not fail. Moreover, it was very likely to be a big hit in the ratings. In this case, even if Li Jiandong's investment share was not high, he could still get a lot of benefits. He not only earned a favor but also got a return of benefits. Could be said to be killing 2 birds with 1 stone. Therefore, with her shrewd business mind, Zhou Qin was keenly aware of the benefits and spared no effort to persuade Chow Kefi to promote this matter. Li Yundong, who was standing to one side, also knew what she was thinking, so he said with a smile, "Zhou Qin is right. If the money is left in the bank, it will depreciate and benefit those black-hearted businessmen and officials for no reason. I might as well give it to you. You can help me invest and keep it safe. Why not?" Li Jiandong's words were very polite and euphemistic. Chow Kefi was a little moved in her heart. She thought about it and decided not to be pretentious. She tucked her hair behind her ear and said with a smile, "Well, then I won't stand on ceremony. I'll sign a contract with you later and discuss the rules." Li Jiandong smiled and said, "You can talk about this matter with Zhou Qin. I don't care about these things." Chow Kefi and Lu Feier both laughed. The things that had been troubling them these days were finally solved. Speaking of which, if it weren't for Chow Kefi being too clean and beautiful, there would be as many people eyeing her as carps crossing the river. Otherwise, it would be a big joke for a producer like her, who had a lot of experience and connections, to be unable to pull a few million yuan of funds from all over the place. After this matter was resolved, Lu Feier smiled happily and suggested that everyone have a drink to celebrate the cooperation between the two sides. Li Jiandong readily agreed. He turned his head and asked Zhou Qin to get the tea set. He wanted Zi Yuan or Su Chan to personally perform a tea ceremony. But before he could speak, he suddenly heard a violent knock on the door outside. A loud shout came from outside, "Open the door! Open the door!" Li Jiandong's door had never been smashed like this before. For a moment the people in the room looked at each other. Ling Yu walked to the door and shouted with an unhappy face, "Who is it? Why are you knocking so loudly?" The voice outside the door was extremely noisy and fierce. A group of people shouted one after another, "Cut the crap and open the door. If you don't open the door, I'll break it." When Ling Yu heard this, she was furious. "Are you kidding? Who are you? Do you know whose door you are breaking?" Even a fairy like Zi Yuan, who was usually not angry at all, was unhappy. She shook her head secretly and thought to herself, if the house of the reincarnated Wisdom King is smashed, it will make all the cultivators in the world laugh their heads off. Li Jiandong was originally in a good mood talking with Chao Kefi and Lu Feier, but at this time his face suddenly darkened. He walked toward the door. He wanted to see who it was that wanted to smash his own door. It was really an old man who had eaten arsenic and was tired of living. Let's not talk about anything else. Take a look at my daily update time in the past 2 days. I haven't updated at this time for a long time. Right now, to me, sleeping is the happiest thing. While my fellow readers are in their sweet dreams, I, Tang, am still running around for a living, working hard to write. Please understand, thank you. Chapter 806. Li Yundong walked to the door and pulled it open. He was greeted by a group of policemen in uniform who were yelling at him, "Police! We received a report that someone is prostituting here." What? When the people in the room heard this, they were all furious. All of them were beautiful women, and all of them cherished their reputation. Now they were being accused of prostitution. It was really intolerable. Li Yundong was also furious. Ever since he had cultivated to the top phase of Jinshin and comprehended the truth of heaven and earth, he had rarely lost his temper. However, the current situation was too infuriating. Even a clay figurine would be angry, and even Buddha would be angry, let alone Li Yundong, the reincarnated Wisdom King. If Li Yundong hadn't had such a strong aura and stood at the door like a wall, blocking the way, the policeman would have rushed in like a tide. At this time, he said with a dark face, "Who reported that someone was prostituting here?" The leading policeman looked extremely young and arrogant. He waved his arms and shouted, "It's none of your business. Get out of the way. We want to check." "Check? What right do you have to break into people's houses?" Li Yundong's eyebrows slowly rose, and his face became gloomier and gloomier. When he was usually serious, he looked dignified without being angry. At this time, his eyebrows were vertical and his eyes were sharp. It was really amazing and suffocating. The policeman was frightened by Li Yundong's power and suddenly couldn't speak. He only felt that Li Yundong's eyes were cold, looking at him as if he were looking at a dead man. He couldn't help shouting, "What do you want to do? Do you want to resist the law? Do you want to rebel?" The policemen behind him unconsciously touched their waists, but they only felt batons, electric batons and handcuffs. They immediately complained in their hearts. They were all policemen of the Public Security Brigade, and they were in charge of cracking down on prostitution. As long as it was not a large-scale operation, there was no need for guns, so they didn't carry guns at all. If they took out their guns, they might scare this arrogant young man into kneeling on the ground, which would save them so much trouble. Li Yundong looked at them coldly and said with a sneer, "Rebel? Resist the law? What are you talking about? I'm doing fine in my own home, but you guys suddenly rush up and accuse me for no reason. Are you still the people's police? I think you are the people's bandits." The policeman was stunned for a moment, and then he said angrily, "What did you say?" As he spoke, he looked past Li Yundong into the room, only to see a room full of beautiful women, dazzling him. He was both shocked and angry. He sneered and said, "Wow, so many women, and you still say you're not prostituting?" If it was just Li Yundong, he would just treat it as a breeze and not care about it at all. However, this sentence had destroyed all the people close to him, especially Su Chan. Li Yundong was furious. His eyes flashed like lightning and his voice was vaguely ferocious. "What did you say? Say it again." Behind him, Zi Yuan and Su Chan knew Li Yundong best. Hearing the murderous intent in his voice, they were shocked. Su Chan cried out involuntarily, "Yundong, calm down. Ziyuan immediately turned her head to look at Zhou Qin and hurriedly whispered, "Go up and help. Do you want to see your master kill people?" Zhou Qin had wanted to go up for a long time, but Li Yundong was in front of her. As his disciple, it was not convenient for her to go up without receiving a signal. At this time, hearing Ziyuan's words, Zhou Qin immediately stood up, raised her eyebrows and said sternly, "Who are you? Whose subordinates are you? Gong Zixin sent you? Does he not want to be the director anymore?" Gong Zixin was none other than the director of the Tianan City Public Security Bureau. The director of the Public Security Bureau was a key department of the government, and he had great power. Even the mayor or the secretary did not dare to underestimate him. Gong Zixin was also a well-known figure in Tianan City, and many people wanted to curry favor with him but could not. But such a person was actually called out by his name by a young and beautiful woman. Zhou Qin's words really frightened these policemen. They all looked at Zhou Qin in surprise and doubt. They didn't know the background of this beautiful woman in front of them at all. How could her words be so scary? Just when they were at a loss, a cough suddenly came from upstairs. The middle-aged man from before slowly walked down the stairs and said, "What happened? Why is it so noisy?" When the leading policeman saw the middle-aged man, he immediately saluted and said, "Hello, Minister Li." The arrogance and surliness on the middle-aged man's face had been swept away. At this time his face was full of kindness. He smiled slightly and did not look at Li Yundong and the others. He just greeted these policemen gently, appearing to be approachable. These policemen also knew that although Minister Li was not a great official, he was, after all, an official. They also felt honored that he greeted them so kindly, and they all felt as if they were bathing in the spring breeze. After the leading policeman told him what had happened, he secretly winked at the middle-aged man and then signaled Li Yundong with his eyes. He lowered his voice and said, "This doesn't seem to be an ordinary person. It's a bit tricky. Minister Li, what should we do? Tell me." Minister Li was a citizen who had enthusiastically called the police. In his opinion, as long as he used his connections to transfer a group of policemen to investigate this young man on the charge of prostitution, he would probably be so scared that he would pee in his pants. Then he would come out as a savior to appease these frightened beauties. At that time, Minister Li's plan was not bad, but he had miscalculated his opponent. Moreover, the policeman who had whispered to him had not expected that the beauties in the room behind Li Yundong, except for Lu Feier, were all cultivators with sharp ears and eyes. They had all heard the policeman's words clearly and were keenly aware of some dirty collusion between the two of them. At this time they were all angry, and Zhou Qin was so angry that her pretty face turned pale. She had never been splashed with dirty water like this before. She immediately sneered and said, "Minister Li? What Minister Li? Are you the Minister of the Organization Department or the Minister of Education? Or are you from other departments?" After that, she turned her head and shouted at the young policeman, "Call Director Gong here. I want to see how he manages his own people." The young policeman was not an idiot. Seeing that Zhou Qin was not afraid, he felt that something was wrong. He kept glancing at Minister Li, who was standing to one side. Minister Li was also stunned. He frowned secretly and suddenly came to his senses. Could it be that I've kicked an iron plate? But he was also extremely cunning. He felt that he had not been exposed, so he nodded to the young policeman and said, "Just call Director Gong. Don't rush into the Dragon King Temple." The young policeman cursed in his heart. He was just a small policeman in the public security brigade. How could he have the qualification and courage to call the director? But he quickly had an idea. He dialed the captain's number and hung up after whispering for a while. Not long after, a young policeman appeared on the scene. As soon as he appeared, the policeman in the corridor saluted and said, "Captain Lu." Li Yundong, who had been watching coldly from the sidelines, suddenly sneered when he saw Captain Lu. This man was none other than the young policeman he had dealt with when he had broken into Dihao. Later, the policeman had come to his house to apologize. Now he had become a captain. It seemed that he had been promoted to a higher position. Li Yundong's expectations were not wrong at all. At that time, Captain Lu had been quick-witted and had reduced a lot of burden and trouble for Director Gong. Therefore, he had been appreciated by Director Gong and had been promoted after returning. Captain Lu had just listened to his subordinate's report. At first, he didn't take it seriously, but as soon as he heard the location, he was so scared that his legs trembled and he almost threw his phone away. He was too familiar with this place. He had been here before. Others might not know who lived in this place, but he knew it very well. Was his subordinate blind? How could he provoke this guy? Captain Lu immediately put down the phone. After reporting the matter to Director Gong, he immediately rushed to Li Yundong's home. He only wished that there was a fire behind his butt and he could turn into a rocket and fly there. He ran all the way for fear that something irreversible would happen. If that happened, he would be in big trouble, so when he arrived at the scene he was a little out of breath. After seeing the situation on the scene, he secretly breathed a sigh of relief. Fortunately, it hadn't caused any uncontrollable disaster. At this time the policeman on the scene greeted him, and Director Li also smiled and nodded to him. Captain Lu's position and rank were much lower than Director Li's. Logically speaking, when he saw Director Li take the initiative to greet him with a smile, he should be very flattered and immediately return the greeting. However, he was so nervous at this time that he didn't care so much. He just nodded to Director Li and then turned his eyes to Li Yundong. Seeing this, Director Li secretly frowned. He was a little unhappy, but what happened soon left him dumbfounded and sweating profusely. He saw Captain Lu salute Li Yundong, then stretch out his hands with a nervous and respectful expression, as if he had met his own ancestor. "Young Master Li, I'm late. You've been wronged. Are you all right? Director Gong asked me to say hello to you. He is outside on official business and can't come back for the time being, so he asked me to come in his place." This time, the policemen on the scene were so scared that their faces turned green. Their captain had actually said such words to Li Yundong so respectfully and even stretched out his hands to shake hands. In the officialdom, shaking hands was a skill. Extending one hand and extending both hands was very particular. Generally, only the superiors and subordinates who were quite different from each other would shake hands. In order to show respect and fear, the subordinates would stretch out their hands to shake hands with their superiors. What was the background of this young and handsome man in front of them? How could he make their captain act like this? Director Li was also dumbfounded. Although this Captain Lu's position and rank were lower than his position was in a key department. He had a lot of power in his hands. His department, on the other hand, could not be compared to the department he was in. Therefore, even if the two of them shook hands, Captain Lu would only stretch out one hand. He would never stretch out both hands. The group of policemen was terrified, and Director Li, who had been wishful thinking, was even more nervous. He began to plan a way out. The group of people was dumbfounded, but soon Captain Li saluted Zhou Qin again and said more respectfully, "Miss Zhou, Director Gong asked me to say hello to you and to Governor Zhou." "Governor Zhou?" The policemen only felt that their eyes were going dark. Director Li shivered and almost fell down the stairs. He only felt bitterness in his mouth. He had made a smart plan, but he didn't expect that it would ruin him. What kind of joke was this? They actually framed a provincial governor's daughter with the crime of selling sex. This was a dead end. Chapter 807. At this time, the young policeman even wanted to jump off the building and commit suicide. He finally understood why Zhou Qin could say such arrogant words before. Gong Zixin, a dignified director of the Municipal Public Security Bureau, could not be dismissed because of her words. Even if this happened in an ancient feudal society, it was unlikely that such a thing would happen. However, the most important thing in officialdom was not to make enemies out of thin air, let alone offending the immediate family of a high-ranking official. Moreover, even if she could not touch Gong Zixin, wouldn't it be a piece of cake for her to make a move on a small policeman like him? The middle-aged man, Director Li, also turned pale. He suddenly remembered what had happened to Zhou Qin and Li Yundong, who had been spreading like wildfire. Could it be that the one he had provoked was the Li Yundong who could alarm Li Yuanbo by opening a tea-house? Thinking of this, Director Li really wanted to jump up and slap himself in the face a few times. Then he stretched out two fingers and stabbed them hard into his eye sockets. He was really blind to have offended such a person. Director Li's heart trembled. He knew that if Li Yundong or Zhou Qin knew the ins and outs of this matter, he would be in trouble. Therefore he immediately grabbed the young policeman, coughed dryly and said in a reproachful tone, "Xiao Wang, it's not that I want to criticize you. It's good for you to go out and clean up the filth of society, but you should be more civilized when enforcing the law. Nowadays we all talk about civilized law enforcement. Moreover, how can you so rudely and simply determine that the other party is a prostitute just because of a call to the police?" Director Li's hand squeezed Officer Xiao Wang's palm hard. The hint was very obvious. If you don't expose me, I'll owe you a favor. In the future, even if you get screwed over, I'll still be there to help you. If you expose me, just you wait. Policeman Xiao Wang was not a fool. Naturally, he understood the meaning behind it. He only felt bitterness in his mouth. When he received Director Li's call, he took the lead and went straight here with a few of his men to crack down on prostitution. However, he didn't expect to kick an iron plate and break his own foot. The most tragic thing was that Director Lee, the initiator of all this, had first cleared his name and let him rush out to take the blame. But what was even more tragic was that he still had to take the blame for this. Otherwise, if he were to forcefully remove himself from this matter, then he would definitely suffer an extremely miserable end in the future. If he was blamed by Zhou Qin, Li Yundong and the others, he would at most lose his position. Later, Director Li could still help him. At least he would have a good ending. However, if he made things clear, even if the two young masters and the princess didn't care about him, Director Li would definitely try every possible way to remove his hat. Once he removed his hat, he was afraid that it would be removed forever. At that time, no one would be able to help him. Most of the officials possessed a nimble mind. Although they weren't usually intelligent when it came to their own benefits and official hats, their intelligence and wisdom could truly cause Einstein to feel inferior to death. In an instant, Policeman Xiao Wang clearly understood the gains and losses in this matter. For a moment, his heart was filled with grief and indignation. He looked at Li Yundong and Zhou Qin with a face full of tears, trembling and stammering, wanting to say a complete apology, but when the words were on the tip of his tongue, he couldn't say them. Li Yundong nodded to Captain Lu, who had already been promoted, and said, "Since it was a misunderstanding, then forget it. Be careful in the future and don't jump to conclusions so easily." Captain Lu was greatly moved. He saluted again, then stretched out his hands and said excitedly, "Child Li, you are really magnanimous. On behalf of the entire Tiannan City Security Brigade, I would like to express my gratitude to you. When we go back, we will definitely reflect on this matter and avoid such a thing from happening again." Only then did a slight smile appear on Li Yundong's face. Captain Lu shifted his gaze to Zhou Qin again. With a dry smile on his face, he said ingratiatingly, "Miss Zhou, this is just a misunderstanding. How do you think we should deal with it?" Zhou Qin sneered and glanced at Director Li, who was not far away from her. She also knew that this policeman was just a gun being used. The real bad guy was Director Li. But now that he had cleared himself clean, even if she wanted to cause trouble for him, she was afraid that she wouldn't have an excuse. If she insisted on causing trouble, Director Li would bite the bullet and shout that he was wronged. Then things would really be a little difficult to clean up. Although she could always find a way as long as she found the phone number to report the case, it would be too embarrassing if the news spread. It was fine if she was innocent, but there were also Ziyuan, Su Chan and so many other people here. Moreover, her master was also implicated in it. It would be fine if others chewed on her tongue, but if they also chewed on Li Yundong's tongue, then Zhou Qin would definitely fly into a rage. Zhou Qin snorted and said meaningfully, "Don't worry, I'm not an unreasonable person. If it's just a misunderstanding, then let bygones be bygones. But as long as it's someone who really wants to frame us and smear us, I will never let them go." Hearing this, Captain Lu quickly nodded and said with a smile, "That's true. We won't let go of such people who start rumors and slander outstanding citizens like Miss Zhou and Child Li." When Li Yundong heard this, he thought, "Well, since when have I become an outstanding citizen?" He smiled inwardly, but the smile on his face became very gentle again. "Forget it, you can go back. It's almost the new year and you're very busy with work. It's normal to receive false calls and make mistakes in judgment." Captain Lu's heart was as comfortable as drinking a glass of warm water on a cold day. He felt very excited. Look, this is what it means to be magnanimous. At this time, Director Li, who was standing to one side, couldn't stand still. No matter how he listened, he felt that Zhou Qin's words seemed to be directed at him. Especially after he watched coldly for a while, he saw Zhou Qin glance at him. Her eyes were really cold and sharp, which made him shudder. Director Li felt as if there were pins and needles on his back. He also laughed and said, "Since it's a misunderstanding, I'll go back." After that, he forced himself to calm down and walked upstairs. As soon as he disappeared from the sight of Li Yundong, Zhou Qin, and the others, his face became extremely ugly and weak. He almost couldn't climb the stairs. Thinking of Zhou Qin's words, he wanted to escape from this place immediately and run as far as he could. But he also knew that he couldn't leave now. Once he did, the other party's suspicion would really be confirmed. He should even show more enthusiasm at this time, and it would be best if he could invite the other party to his house for a chat. If he had known that there were such two big shots living downstairs in the room he had arranged for his little lover, such a thing would not have happened. After Director Li returned home, he wandered around the room like a headless fly for a long time. Then he gritted his teeth, turned his head and shouted at his little lover, who was looking at him with a strange look in her eyes, Go downstairs with me." The little lover didn't know what Director Lee had just done. As soon as she heard that he wanted her to go to the place downstairs where there were many beautiful women, she was unhappy. She shook her head and said, "I won't go." Director Lee's heart was already full of evil fire. He immediately turned his head and said fiercely, "Are you going?" The little lover was shocked by his ferocious face and immediately said obediently, "I'll go with you. Why are you so fierce?" Seeing that she had agreed, Director Lee calmed down a little. He thought for a moment, gritted his teeth and said, "Do you still have the shopping cards I gave you last time?" The little lover answered absent-mindedly while touching up her makeup, "Yes, what's wrong?" Director Lee said, "Take them out and wrap them in a red envelope." When the little lover heard this, she was unhappy. She put down the makeup box in her hand and said angrily, "You gave them to me." These shopping cards had been bribed by Director Lee. These were the safest things to give away these days. However, Director Lee had so many shopping cards in his hands and it was useless. He couldn't use them all, so he gave them to his little lover to please her. If it had been in normal times, when the little lover got angry, Director Lee would have immediately smiled apologetically and carefully coaxed her. However, now that his job was in danger, how could he care so much? The most ruthless people in the world were politicians. As long as there was a problem, their first reaction was always to protect themselves first, and they would never think about other people. Director Lee glared at her and said sternly, "Can't you take back what I gave you? If you keep talking, I'll kill you." The little lover had never seen the man in front of her like this. She only felt that this man was as fierce as a beast. There was no gentleness and pampering in his daily life. She was so scared that she trembled all over and didn't dare to say another word. She quickly went into the room, put more than a dozen shopping cards in a red envelope and took them out. Director Lee led her downstairs without saying a word. When the two of them arrived at the door, they carefully knocked on the door. They no longer had the arrogant and despotic demeanor from before. Their expressions were like sinners waiting to be judged. Before long the door was opened. It was a smiling and stunningly beautiful woman. It was Chow Kefi. Director Lee only took a look at her and felt that her soul was about to be hooked away by her. Her eyes were fixed and she couldn't help but exclaim in her heart, "How could there be such a seductive beauty in the world? What kind of man can enjoy such a woman?" The little lover next to her also felt jealous. She didn't dare to say it, but she kept cursing him in her heart. When Chow Kefi saw him at a glance, the smile on her face suddenly disappeared. She asked lightly, "What's the matter?" Director Lee suddenly came to his senses. After swallowing his saliva, he forcibly withdrew the greed and amazement in his eyes and said humbly, "There was a misunderstanding just now. I was very irrational and impulsive. I wanted to apologize at that time, but seeing that there were outsiders present, I didn't say it. After all, it's not good for Child Lee to say it. So I waited for them to leave before I came to visit you. I hope Child Lee can be magnanimous and let bygones be bygones." Chow Kefi was a shrewd person. She naturally knew that Director Lee had changed from arrogance to humility. Naturally, she had discovered that Li Yundong's identity was not ordinary, so she had come to beg for mercy. She knew that she couldn't make the decision, so she turned her head to look into the room and shouted, "Li Yundong, they're looking for you." Chapter 808. Li Yundong heard Director Lee's words clearly. He didn't want to deal with such despicable people. He waved his hand impatiently, motioning for Chow Kefi to drive him away. Chow Kefi had to turn around and say to Director Lee, "Don't worry, it's okay. Li Yundong is busy. He has no time to see you." Director Lee became more and more nervous. He held up the red envelope with both hands and said with a smile, "The new year is coming. I don't have any greeting gifts. I only prepared these in a hurry. I hope Mr. Lee will like them." Chow Kefi glanced at the red envelope and frowned secretly. She didn't know what to do. Just as she was about to look back, she saw that Li Yundong had already walked to her side. Although there was a smile on his face, there was a faint trace of displeasure in his eyes. He said, "Director Lee, I've received your kindness. It was indeed my fault that caused the conflict just now. I apologize to you, but please take it back." Li Yundong's attitude had been neither servile nor overbearing, even when he hadn't revealed his identity. He appeared calm and composed. He didn't back down because of the other party's arrogance, nor did he become aggressive because of the other party's humble flattery. He showed his excellent character. Director Lee's little lover saw this and sighed in her heart. This is a dragon among men. I wonder how many lives of good fortune it takes to be able to snuggle up to such a man. While she was thinking about it, Director Lee smiled awkwardly and held the red envelope in his hand. He didn't know whether to accept it or not. Chow Kefi saw that Li Yundong was too embarrassed to drive him away, so she smiled and said, "Well, that's it. It's over. We still have things to do." The smile on Director Li's face froze and he cursed in his heart. But he didn't dare to pester and refused to leave, so he nodded and bowed and said, "Well, I'll come back another day to visit." As he said that, he secretly kicked his little lover next to him, indicating that she should also say something. The little lover was a little jealous of Chow Kefi's stunning beauty. After being kicked by Director Li, she also smiled and said sweetly, "Yes, it's going to be the new year soon. When the time comes, the two families will have a good time together." Chow Kefi's eyes were like the fiery eyes of gold, as if she could see through the real relationship between the two at once. Although she was beautiful and strong, she was very strict with herself, never compromised with any unspoken rules and never loved vanity, so she hated such a woman who sold her body for vanity the most. She said with a faint smile, "Two families? All right, when the time comes, this little sister must bring her family along. Let's have a drink together." When the little lover heard this, her face changed as if she had been slapped in the face in public. If it had been in front of others, she might not have been so angry, but she felt that Chow Kefi had said such words in front of Li Yundong. She simply wanted to find a hole to hide in. Learn. The little lover gritted her teeth in hatred and thought to herself, "What are you pretending for? There are so many women around this man, I don't believe you are his first wife. You are a sly fox, why are you pretending to be pure?" Director Li saw that the situation was far from good. He was afraid that his lover would say something unpleasant, so he quickly smiled and said, "We've caused trouble for young Master Li today, we won't disturb you any further. We'll come again another day to apologize. Farewell." As he spoke, he pulled his lover's hand and headed upstairs. The little lover was angry. She turned her head and stared at Chow Kefi, who was at the door, and cursed silently, "Bitch, sly fox." Li Yundong had already turned around and entered the door at this time, so he did not see the woman's silent words. But Chow Kefi saw it clearly from the corner of her eyes before entering the door. Her body suddenly trembled, and a burst of anger surged in her for no reason, and her eyes were full of murderous intent. After the little lover scolded silently, she turned around and went upstairs. She did not see Chow Kefi's frightening gaze, nor did she know that her quick tongue had buried the root of a fatal disaster. Chow Kefi's murderous eyes followed the woman closely. She moved and was about to follow up when she suddenly heard Li Yundong turn his head at this time and ask curiously, "President Chow, what's wrong with you?" When Chow Kefi heard this voice, her body suddenly trembled, and the murderous intent in her eyes slowly faded. Soon she was at a loss and said in a daze, "No, nothing." Li Yundong smiled and said, "Nothing, then why are you still standing at the door?" Chow Kefi responded with a little confusion, turned around, closed the door and walked in. At the warm invitation of Li Yundong and others, Chow Kefi and Lu Feier agreed to stay at Li Yundong's house, but both of them lived in the house on the side of the Purple Garden. Late at night, Lu Feier took Chow Kefi's hand and talked excitedly. Naturally, Li Yundong and the others were part of the conversation. The two of them talked for a long time before they fell asleep one after another. After falling asleep, Chow Kefi fell into a dream. She had dreamed of this dream more than once, but the previous dreams were very vague. But this time the dream was very real. The surrounding scenery, people, sounds, and scenes all appeared clearly in front of Chow Kefi's eyes like a picture. At first, she dreamt that she was a little fox without any worries. Slowly, as time went by, she, who grew up in the spiritual mountain, began to understand the life power Upanishad. Slowly, she cultivated into a human form. Later on, she met many of her own kind. Soon, she distinguished herself and became their leader. But she soon found that she was surrounded by danger. Everyone in the world looked down on them and she vowed to change all this. In order to become stronger, she sneaked into Mount Wutai to learn martial arts, but she inadvertently went crazy. But when she was about to die, the eminent monk of Mount Wutai, Zen Master Hui Fa, saved her with his Tongyang body. When she dreamed of this, Chow Kefi found that the appearance of Zen Master Hui Fa was vaguely similar to Li Yundong. Especially when the two of them were having fun, all kinds of romantic love, it really made her feel as if her whole body was wrapped in a ball of flame, burning her body, and her body kept twisting. But soon, this beautiful dream suddenly changed. She expressed her love to Zen Master Hui Fa, who had saved her life, but she was severely reprimanded and scolded that she was a fox. At that time she was ashamed and covered her face and left. Later she was unwilling to give up and sneaked into Mount Mao, secretly learning the essence of Taoism, causing a war between the north and the south of Taoism. When her cultivation reached the advanced stage, she went to Mount Wutai and ruthlessly humiliated Zen Master Hui Fa, who had once rejected her and then swaggered away. But, then she heard the news that Zen Master Hui Fa vomited blood and died. At that time she was at a loss, regretful, disappointed, and upset. At this time she also became the target of public criticism in the world of cultivation. Everyone who saw her would curse her as a fox and a stinking bitch. At that time when she saw such a person she killed one on the spot. Did they think that she couldn't kill people? Hey, the more ruthless she killed, the more ruthless these people scolded her. The more ruthless they scolded, the more ruthless she killed. Let's see who is more ruthless. When Chow Kefi dreamed of this, the corners of her mouth unconsciously curved into a cold and cruel smile. The corner of her mouth wriggled a little as if she was whispering something. She turned over and continued to dream deeply. Then Chow Kefi dizzily dreamed that she finally violated the law of heaven, and her soul and body were destroyed by heavenly lightning. She fled to the distant Japanese Ocean in a daze and hid there. But good times did not last long. She was finally discovered, and was once again pointed at her nose and scolded as a stinking bitch and a fox. Although her magic power had not fully recovered, when she heard such words she still flew into a rage and fought with the Japanese. After that, Chow Kefi dreamt that she had fallen into an incomparably chaotic black hole. She had been trapped for nearly 1,000 years, but all of a sudden, the chaotic black hole cracked open with a kacha sound. She suddenly saw a sky full of blood sprinkling down, and above her head was a floating bloody pagoda. At this moment, countless memory fragments automatically reorganized in an instant and gathered together. Chow Kefi suddenly opened her eyes. Her eyes widened, and the pupils in her eyes shrank rapidly, gradually condensing into a needle. Her originally dark eyes slowly turned blood red, extremely enchanting. She turned her head and looked at Lu Feier, who was sleeping quietly beside her, with a strange look in her eyes. Chow Kefi knew at this time she should be called the mystical silver fox. At this time, the mystical silver fox's soul finally completed the reorganization, and her memory finally completely recovered. The memories of the time when she got out of the seal also appeared in her mind bit by bit. The mystical silver fox sat there quietly like a stone sculpture. After a long time, a cold smile slowly appeared on the corner of her mouth. She moved and stood up barefoot. Her figure was graceful, as light as a spirit fox. Every step she took, her waist swayed like a weak willow in the wind. She tipped her toes slightly and slowly walked out of the door without a sound. After the mystical silver fox went out of the room, she looked around in the empty and quiet living room, and then quietly pushed open the door of the balcony. She walked to the balcony and looked up. She tapped her toes lightly and jumped quickly. When she landed again, she had already landed on the balcony upstairs. The mystical silver fox glanced inside and saw that the floor of the house was in a mess. There were discarded clothes everywhere. With the help of the moonlight, she could clearly recognize that these clothes belonged to the woman who had scolded her before. The corners of the mystical silver fox's mouth slightly curved into a cruel and bloody smile. She quietly pushed open the French window on the balcony and slowly walked in. She wanted to let this woman understand that no one in the world dared to scold her in the past. She had tried her best to kill the other party. Could it be that after 1,000 years, the world thought that she did not dare to kill people? Chapter 809. In the silence of the night, the middle-aged man, Director Li, was asleep with his naked lover in his arms. However, he was having a nightmare. In this nightmare, Director Li was reported for taking bribes, and was punished by the Commission for Discipline Inspection and Discipline Inspection. He lost his position and then his lover ran away with the money. His child ignored him, and all his friends who used to call him brothers drew a line with him. Only the yellow-faced woman he looked down on was still by his side, crying all day long. Director Li abruptly woke up from his nightmare. His heart was filled with guilt. His forehead was covered in sweat and he gasped for breath. His eyes were wide open like a dead fish, and the uneasiness in his heart was like dough that kept fermenting and swelling. No, I've offended Mr. Li and Miss Zhou. The consequences must be very serious. They will definitely not let me go. I have to go and apologize again. I don't believe that there's no one in this world who isn't greedy for money. Director Li picked up something and wiped the sweat off his forehead as he thought to himself with lingering fear. In his opinion, all men in the world were as greedy as he was. This Mr. Li had so many beautiful women around him that he couldn't curry favor with him, but he could curry favor with money. As long as he gritted his teeth and spent a lot of money, he might be able to get a big backer like Mr. Li. Then, he would be able to get back 100-fold in the future. The main reason why few officials in China did good things was because they treated being an official as an investment and a business. As the saying goes, traveling thousands of miles to become an official is for money. As long as they can earn money, they are willing to pay any price. From power, money, and beauty to the interests of the common people and their own souls, there was nothing that they couldn't trade or sell. Director Li thought very seriously. He had apologized to Li Yundong and Zhou Qin before, but he didn't get a response from them. This made him very nervous, and when he got home he couldn't sit still. The famous Russian writer Chekhov once wrote an immortal short story called The Death of a Junior Civil Servant. It was short and concise, even less than 2,000 words. It was about a junior civil servant, Chervyakov, who accidentally spat on a general in the front row while watching a play in the theater. The junior civil servant panicked and kept apologizing, which made the general not know whether to laugh or cry. Then the general really flew into a rage. The junior civil servant didn't get the general's forgiveness and died of fear after returning home. Director Li was a bit like Chervyakov, a character written by Chekhov. He was restless even in his dreams. The only thing he had that was better than this little civil servant was that his psychological quality was very strong. He had resisted the urge to run away that night. In fact, he also knew that the monk could run away but the temple could not. If Li Yundong and Zhou Qin wanted to deal with him, where could he run to? Go abroad? He hadn't earned enough yet. Besides, it was very difficult to escape naked now. Director Li sat by the bed and looked at his little lover who was sleeping soundly on the bed. He cursed in his heart, Mother Cur, it's better to be a woman. Once we get married we can live a happy life. How can I be like this? It's so difficult to be an official and I'm scared all day long. Director Li sighed and his body was sweating profusely. He kept wiping his sweat with something in his hand, but he soon found that something was wrong. The thing in his hand smelled. He looked down and saw that he was holding a lacy blue underwear. It belonged to his little lover. He had used it to wipe the traces of the war. Director Li immediately felt disgusted and hurriedly threw the underwear far away. But as soon as he threw it, he found that the underwear was floating in front of a pair of feet. It was a pair of beautiful feet that were as white as jade. She was not wearing shoes or socks. The tips of her toes were padded, and the instep of her feet was arched in a beautiful arc. There was not a single meridian or blood vessel in this arc. The smooth jade-like feet were like a piece of natural white jade. At the top of this piece of white jade, each toe was like a delicate jade pearl, round and exquisite. In particular, each toenail exuded a pinkish color, which made it look very charming. Director Li had played with a lot of women, but he had never seen a woman's feet as beautiful as this. It was as if this pair of beautiful feet was transformed from the world's most enchanting spirit, specially born to charm men. Just by looking at these beautiful feet, he couldn't help but stare blankly, swallowing his saliva incessantly. With such a pair of beautiful feet, how beautiful would she be? In an instant, Director Li's soul was almost seduced by this woman. His whole body trembled slightly and he raised his head little by little. But when he really raised his head, he suddenly found that this woman turned out to be the beautiful woman who had opened the door for him at the last moment downstairs. Director Li looked at her with his mouth agape. He only felt that although this face was clearly the one he had seen before, there was a blood-red light in this woman's eyes. This gaze was like a ball of netherworld flame burning in the sea of blood and hell, full of disgust and hatred, which made people shudder. This woman was the mystical silver fox. As soon as Director Li saw this pair of terrible eyes, his rising desire instantly faded away. The instinct of animal fear dominated all his will and nerves in an instant. His desire to survive and animal instinct told him that this woman must be here to kill him. Director Li couldn't help but scream, "Help!" But as soon as his voice came out of his throat, the mystical silver fox stretched out a jade arm like lightning. Her pink lotus-like forearm was exposed in the air, and her 5 fingers were like spring onions. She made a gesture of strangling the other party's throat from a meter or 2 away, and then slowly raised her arm. The powerful aura and jinchi of the mystical silver fox wrapped the middle-aged man invisibly and slowly grabbed him in the air. At this time the little lover on the bed also woke up in a daze. As soon as she opened her eyes, she was shocked to find that the man beside her was floating in the air, covering his throat with both hands, his eyes bulging, his feet kicking, and his throat making a hoarse sound, as if an invisible hand was grabbing his neck and lifting him up. The little lover was so scared that she was about to scream. The mystical silver fox immediately stretched out another hand and lifted her up in the air. The mystical silver fox raised her hands horizontally and carried the man and woman in the air like a chicken. The corners of her mouth curled up slightly, and her smile was cold and full of ridicule. Her body moved, and in an instant she disappeared with the two people, and then appeared more than 100 meters above the ground. At this time the moon was bright and the stars were sparse. Director Li and his little lover were struggling frantically. Their eyes were full of the cold and ferocious smile of the mystical silver fox. In addition, there was a cold crescent moon hanging high in the sky. At a height of more than 100 meters, the cold wind was blowing. It was really a dark and windy night for killing. Director Li and his little lover were so scared that they peed their pants. None of them understood why this extremely beautiful woman in front of them could fly up with them. Moreover, why did she want to kill them? Could it be that I've done too many sins and this is my retribution? A thought suddenly flashed through Director Li's mind. Cultivators could not kill mortals with magic treasures, but this did not mean that cultivators could not kill people or ordinary people. Especially for people like the mystical silver fox who had been fighting with others almost all her life, there were at least 9,000 ways for her to kill ordinary people without using magic treasures and magic such as Nauk. The mystical silver fox held her little lover in one hand and suddenly smiled. You must regret it. Why did you scold me before, right? Only then did the little lover realize that she had said one more word with a cheap mouth, which immediately aroused the revenge of the mystical silver fox, who would seek revenge for the smallest grievance. In the end, she brought about a fatal disaster. Her throat was choked and she couldn't speak, but her eyes kept crying. Her eyes begged the mystical silver fox to spare her life. However, the mystical silver fox shook her head with a smile and said, I know that you must be saying in your heart, spare my life. I won't dare to do it next time. The mystical silver fox chuckled and said, but, do you know? There was once a person like you who spoke ill of me. I swore to kill him, but after he was defeated by me, he begged for mercy. My heart softened and I forgave him. But in the end, this person took the lead in gathering almost all the experts of all the sects in the cultivation world. He attacked me when I was practicing the 9th phase of the heavenly Jindan technique. Because of this, I wandered to Dongying, and those dwarfs took the opportunity to seal me for nearly 1,000 years. From then on, I never believed in any begging for mercy. As she spoke, the mystical silver fox brought the woman to her eyes, and the smile on the corner of her mouth became colder and colder. She said slowly, remember not to curse people casually in your next life. After that, she loosened her hand, and the beautiful little lover fell down like a kite with a broken string. The little lover kept waving his limbs in the air and screaming hysterically. But not long after, he fell to the ground with a bang, and the scream stopped abruptly. When Director Li saw that the beautiful woman who had just been on his pillow had died in an instant, he was so scared that he almost fainted. At this time his mind was in a mess. There was a hysterical voice shouting in his mind, who is this person? What cultivation world? What heavenly Jindan technique? What seal? Is this a dream or a movie? What the hell is this? Director Li closed his eyes. He wished that all this was just a nightmare. As long as he opened his eyes again, everything would be safe. But at this time, the mystical silver fox looked at him and suddenly giggled. You are really afraid of death. Do you still look like a man? Don't worry, even if I want to kill you, I will suck up your yang qi and let you die of bliss. At this time, Director Li suddenly opened his eyes. He was really dizzy. He actually had the idea of dying under the peony skirt, and becoming a ghost was also a romantic idea. His eyes bulged, and suddenly there was a trace of burning desire in them. Even the mystical silver fox, a demon who had been enchanted all her life, was stunned when she saw such a fearless embryo. Suddenly she felt disgusted for no reason. She sneered and said, Idiot, what kind of bliss do you think it is? After that, she stretched out her hand and pressed it on the top of his head. As soon as her jinchi moved, she was about to drain the essence and blood of the middle-aged man. When the mystical silver fox had been sealed in a huge stone by the Japanese yin-yang master, Abe Yasuo, the soul of the mystical silver fox had been crazily absorbing the vitality of any life around the stone. As long as the mystical silver fox was given a certain amount of time, she would be able to absorb enough vitality, restore her strength, and break the seal. Abe Yasuo was alert to this. He joined hands with the famous monk Xian Wang to seal the soul of the mystical silver fox deeply again, and quietly replaced the killing stone with the Qingming shrine. He guarded the seal with the power of the family for generations. When the mystical silver fox was sealed, as long as she passed by the killing stone, her life would be sucked dry by her, not to mention that she had been released now. It was strictly forbidden to kill people with magic and magic weapons in the cultivation world, but only this kind of kung fu similar to the star-sucking technique took advantage of this loophole. This kind of kung fu that absorbed other people's essence was neither magic weapon, nor jinchi to kill people. It just used the energy law in physics that powerful material energy would definitely attract weak material energy. The energy of the mystical silver fox was much stronger than that of the other party, so it could easily attract the other party's energy, causing the other party's vitality to be cut off and die. Strictly speaking, this kind of death was considered to be the exhaustion of vitality. Although it was caused by external factors, it would be automatically judged as natural death by the power of heaven, and it would not be restrained by the power of heaven at all. Therefore, this kung fu had been listed as a taboo since ancient times, and those who practiced it would be condemned by the whole world. At that time, the mystical silver fox had shouted and killed wherever she went because she had practiced this kung fu that made heaven angry and people resentful. At this time, she habitually wanted to suck up the other party's essence and blood, but as soon as her jinchi entered the other party's body, she suddenly thought of something. She slowly retracted her hand and smiled coldly. "Forget it, your breath is too dirty and disgusting. Be a clean person in your next life." As she spoke, she loosened her grip. She watched as the middle-aged man waved his arms and legs as he let out a shrill cry. His shrill cry pierced through the silent night sky as he quickly fell to the ground. The mystical silver fox looked down at the figure that was constantly falling, and the smile on the corner of her mouth became colder and colder. She couldn't help but slowly raise her eyes and look at the distant east. She slowly murmured, "Those who have fought against me and offended me. It's time for you to pay the price. Soon I will come to you." After that, her figure flashed and disappeared, leaving only the cold bright moon hanging high in the sky. In the distance, a dark and heavy cloud slowly covered the sky and the moon. Chapter 8:10. The screams of Director Li and his little lover broke the silence of the night. Li Yundong and Su Chan, who were secretly making out in the room, suddenly sat up in shock when they heard the first scream. Su Chan asked with a surprised face, "What happened?" But as soon as she finished speaking, she heard a loud bang as if a heavy object had hit the ground. Su Chan was shocked. "This seems to be." Li Yundong and Su Chan looked at each other in dismay. As soon as they did so, they heard another scream. This time it was from a man. After a while, there was another thud as if a heavy object had hit the ground. Li Yundong's face darkened. He didn't have time to be intimate with the girl. He winked at her and hurried out of the door in their pajamas. As soon as they went out, they saw the others in the room come out curiously and ask each other what had happened. Li Yunyang and Su Chan quickly rushed to the balcony and looked out. As soon as they arrived at the balcony, they saw that Ziyuan, Ruan Hongling, and the others in the room next door had also walked to the balcony with curiosity and surprise. Li Yundong and Ziyuan looked at each other and looked down at the same time. They saw two people lying in a pool of blood. Their eyesight was excellent. Even in the middle of the night, with the help of the moonlight, they could see the identity of the two people from a distance. "What's going on?" Li Yundong's heart sank. "How did they die? This is troublesome. Can't they let me have a good new year?" Ziyuan's face also tightened and she said, "Call the police." Su Chan looked at the two people lying in a pool of blood in confusion. She couldn't help but look up and say, "Strange, how did they die? Jump off the building?" At this time, Zhou Qin also followed her gaze. They lived on the third floor and this building was only 4 stories high. Was it really necessary to jump from the top? Moreover, the two screams just now were obviously from falling from a high altitude. The sound dragged on for a long time. If they jumped from the 4th floor, they would have landed before they could catch their breath. How could the sound drag on for such a long time? Zhou Qin shook her head and said, "That's impossible. He definitely didn't jump off a building. He probably fell from a high altitude." Su Chan had a strange look on her face. There aren't any high floors nearby. Even if they wanted to fall, they wouldn't have the conditions. Could it be that they took a plane and then fell? At this time, Ao Wushuang was also alarmed. She walked to the balcony and silently observed the situation in front of her. After hearing Su Chan's words, she suddenly thought of something and said, "It's unlikely that they took a plane, but it's possible that they flew up." Su Chan blinked. "They can fly by themselves?" Ao Wushuang said lightly, "They can't, but can't we?" These words caused everyone to be instantly speechless, and they looked at each other in dismay. Wasn't that right? Almost everyone here was a cultivator. Could it be that someone found the two of them an eyesore and killed them? The two of them had spoken ill words before and had offended Li Yundong and the others. For a moment, everyone was suspicious of each other. The little foxes were outspoken and asked each other, "Was it you? Tell me the truth." Leniency for those who confess, severity for those who resist. But those who were asked all shook their heads blankly. Li Yundong and the others were even more confused. Li Yundong thought to himself, there shouldn't be anyone so blind as to cause trouble for these two guys at this time. It's almost the spring festival. Why would they do such a thing? Besides, these two guys had offended me, so they didn't deserve to die. Ao Wushuang's sharp eyes swept over everyone's faces. Soon she found that two people were missing from the group. She suddenly had an idea and quickly rushed into the room. But as soon as she moved, she saw Chow Kefi's door creak open. Lu Feier was wearing pajamas and standing at the door with sleepy eyes. She yawned and said in a daze, "What happened? It's so noisy." Ao Wushuang frowned slightly and asked, "Where's Chow Kefi?" Lu Feier looked back and pointed to the room. "Sister Chow is sleeping inside." Ao Wushuang walked to the door and peeked inside. Sure enough, she saw Ao Wushuang sleeping quietly in the room, snoring slightly. Ao Wushuang was stunned and then asked in a low voice, "Was she with you all night?" Lu Feier covered her yawning mouth with her small hand and said, "Of course, Sister Chow and I fell asleep very late. She slept like a pig." Ao Wushuang nodded secretly and didn't ask any more questions. Lu Feier asked curiously, "What happened?" Ao Wushuang pointed to the outside of the balcony and said, "Go and have a look yourself." Lu Feier went to the balcony and looked out. At this time, the lights of the whole building had been turned on. Almost every family had their heads out to look outside, shouting one after another. When Lu Feier saw the two figures on the dark ground, she was also stunned. Then she turned around and ran out of the door like a gust of wind. She went downstairs and took a closer look. Lu Feier sucked in a breath of cold air at the sight. She saw that the beautiful woman who had spoken ill words before was lying in a pool of blood. She was naked, and her whole body was badly mutilated. She almost couldn't be seen. On the other side there was a man lying. The man's head was broken and black, white and red parts were scattered all over the ground. But from the figure, it could be vaguely recognized that it was Director Li from before. Even though Lu Feier was an experienced and knowledgeable actress, she was still shocked. She let out a cry and took a step back. She stepped back and stepped on a person behind her. She was shocked and quickly turned around to apologize. "Oh, I'm sorry." The woman who had been stepped on was about 30 years old. She was also curious to see what was going on between the two of them. She rubbed the back of her foot and was about to scold them when she saw Lu Feier. She was stunned and said, "Hey, aren't you that what?" Lu Feier was shocked. She immediately waved her hand and said, No, I'm not that." After that, she lowered her head and rushed back. Lu Feier was almost discovered, and she was secretly anxious. She also knew that if someone found out that she had appeared in this place, there would be a lot of gossip about her tomorrow. However, it seemed that it was not a bad thing to have a scandal with Li Yundong. But soon Lu Feier thought, with these paparazzi's eagerness to get to the bottom of things, it will be terrible if they find out Li Yundong's true identity. Lu Feier secretly regretted going downstairs to see what was going on out of curiosity. But when she went upstairs and entered the room, the little foxes immediately surrounded her and began to ask questions at once. Although Li Yundong had guessed the identities of these two people, he still asked, "Are they the two guys upstairs?" Lu Feier sighed and said, "Who else could it be?" Li Yundong shook his head and said, "Damn it, I'm very suspicious now. I just don't know who saw us have a conflict with him before." Lu Feier sighed again and said, "It was so noisy during the day. Who couldn't hear it?" Seeing Li Yundong's ugly expression, the little foxes didn't dare to say anything. Instead, Ziyuan comforted him in a low voice, "Don't worry, we didn't do it and no one will accuse us." Su Chan also said, "Yes, I don't believe that no one can find out the truth about this matter." Zhou Qin, who had been silent, frowned secretly. She held her mobile phone in her hand and was ready to call for help at any time. While everyone was talking and feeling a little worried, the police finally arrived after receiving one call after another. In the middle of the night, the flashing police lights illuminated the residential area. The originally quiet residential area suddenly became very lively. None of the families were in the mood to sleep. They were either standing on their balconies to watch the commotion, or surrounding the scene downstairs, pointing and gossiping. The first to arrive were Captain Liu and his subordinates from the Public Security Brigade, followed by the Criminal Police Unit. As soon as the police from the two departments arrived, they immediately controlled the scene. The Public Security Brigade was responsible for driving the crowd away and putting up a cordon. No one was allowed to approach within 20 meters. The members of the criminal police unit took photos at the scene, collected evidence, and reported the situation through the walkie-talkie. I haven't asked you yet. Besides, this isn't a big case. Is there a need for him to come? Zhou Qin smiled slightly and said, since it's not a big case, why are you so aggressive? Moreover, a case related to my master is a big one. If he doesn't come, who will? The square-faced man flew into a rage and slammed the table. Just as he was about to speak, he suddenly heard a burst of laughter coming from outside the open door. Oh, Mr. Li, long time no see. How have you been recently? Chapter 8:11. Hearing this voice, everyone turned their eyes in unison and looked at the door. Everyone saw a man about 50 years old walking in with a smile on his face. Li Yundong also knew this man. It was Director Gong, whom he had met in Dihao. Zhou Qin looked at him from the side and smiled in her heart. Hey, he reacted quickly and came at the right time. But how did he get the news so quickly? As Zhou Qin thought about it, her eyes involuntarily swept behind Director Gong. Sure enough, she saw Captain Liu of the security team following behind him like a shadow. Zhou Qin suddenly realized that it must have been this guy who had tipped them off. In fact, this Captain Liu, who was still a commoner, had been relatively quick-witted and tactful when he was in Dihao. Now that he had been promoted to an official, he knew better than to follow his backer and ask for instructions for everything. What had happened here during the day had been reported to Director Gong as soon as possible, and he had been praised by him. Now that such a thing had happened at night, how could he not report it to his immediate superior as soon as possible? As soon as Captain Liu reported, Director Gong, who liked to strategize and command from afar, had the habit of not being present at the scene, but when he heard the identity of the deceased, the location of the incident, and the suspects involved, he suddenly broke out in a cold sweat. What? Director Li of the Municipal Party Committee fell to his death naked with a mistress? The suspect was actually Li Yundong, who had been congratulated by the governor and almost the entire Tianan municipal government. And he was also married to Zhou Kachang's daughter? What the hell is going on? Two feudal officials had been implicated in this matter. The power behind these two old guys was really terrifying. As for Director Li of the Municipal Party Committee, he originally had some background, but compared with these two high-ranking officials, he was like a yellow fish compared with a blue whale. They were not on the same level at all. Director Gong was keenly aware that he had to be there as soon as possible. On the one hand, he had to take the lead, and on the other hand, he had to leave a good impression in front of young Master Li and Miss Zhou. Although this was unavoidably shameless, if the two of them casually mentioned his name in front of Zhou Kachang or Li Yuanbo afterwards, it would be really beneficial. Because of this, Bureau Chief Gong rushed to the scene immediately. His speed was not much slower than the reporters. Before he arrived, his voice reached first. The three criminal policemen who heard his voice immediately stood up and saluted. Gong Zixin smiled and reached out to shake hands with them. Then he came to Li Yundong enthusiastically and stretched out his hand with an extremely bright smile. Child Li, I haven't seen you for a long time. You look better and better. Li Yundong smiled and shook hands with Director Gong, saying, Director Gong, you're still as elegant as ever. Why are you here today? Director Gong chuckled and said, Hey, don't say that. Since such a big thing happened, I naturally have to come. I heard that young Master Li and little Zhou were involved. How could I sit still? Naturally, I had to come immediately to clear your names. As he said this, he turned to Zhou Qin and said with a smile, Little Zhou, you are also getting more and more beautiful. Zhou Qin smiled slightly and said sharply, Director Gong, don't speak so early. The case has not been finalized yet. We are also suspects. It's not right for you to handle the case like this. She pointed to the three policemen and said with a faint smile, We still have to cooperate with the investigators to make a statement. Gong Zixin secretly frowned and glanced at the three policemen with an unfriendly gaze. Then he laughed and said, What are you talking about? The confession is recorded by the criminal. Even if we want to interrogate them, we should ask the two of you to assist in the investigation and make some statements. As he said this, Gong Zixin turned his head and said to the three policemen in a deep voice, How are your statements? You are in charge of this case. You must uphold the principle of fairness, justice, and openness. You must be worthy of the conscience of heaven and earth and the good style of the common people. You must investigate this case to the bottom. You must not let go of a criminal who escaped the net, and you must not frame an outstanding citizen. No matter how shameless Director Gong was, he would not reprimand his subordinates in front of Li Yundong and Zhou Qin. Otherwise, if the matter spread, How could others point fingers at him behind his back? Who would work for him? Therefore he said such a thing in a roundabout way. His words were watertight and sanctimonious, but in the end the focus was on never framing an outstanding citizen. But who was an outstanding citizen? Wasn't it clear at a glance? The three policemen looked depressed, and the square-faced leader's face was even more sullen. His stomach was full of complaints. You picked these people out as soon as you came. Isn't this disrupting the investigation of the case? These people are obviously the biggest suspects. Why do you need to take a fucking statement? You might as well call it a day and go back to sleep. But these words could only be said in his heart. He absolutely could not say it in front of Li Yundong and Zhou Qin. The square-faced leader suppressed his displeasure and apologized to Li Yundong and Zhou Qin in a muffled voice. I'm sorry, Mr. Li, Miss Zhou. You have your own duties. Just tell us how to cooperate. We will try our best to cooperate with you. Li Yundong's heart was like a mirror. He smiled slightly, knowing that the other party was also a conscientious policeman. It was just that the supervisor had a strong sense of empathy. There was no other fault. He said in a gentle tone, don't mention it. You have your own duties. Just tell us how to cooperate. We will do our best to cooperate with you. Li Yundong's attitude made the three of them feel much better. Their expressions relaxed, and they began to seriously inquire about the case and take notes. After taking notes, the three policemen saluted Li Yundong and the others, turned around and took their leave. Bureau Chief Gong also stood up with a smile and shook hands with Li Yundong and Zhou Qin. Child Li, little Zhou, he said with a smile, if there is any inconvenience, please forgive us. We will definitely investigate the case and clear Child Li's name. Li Yundong smiled faintly. The innocent will be innocent, and the turbid will be turbid. Bureau Chief Gong gave him a thumbs up. Good. Child Li, you really have a good bearing. Amazing. Square-faced and the two policemen behind him felt sick to their stomachs when they saw Bureau Chief Gong's shameless flattery. They found an excuse and quickly left. When the three of them went downstairs, the four-eyed officer couldn't help but grumble. Bureau Chief Gong himself is a criminal investigator. How can he not understand the rules? How can there be someone like him? The biggest suspect had been singled out as soon as he arrived. Isn't this creating obstacles and trouble for us to solve the case? The policewoman next to him sneered. Childish. Can't you see that these people have powerful backgrounds? Bureau Chief Gong is just trying to protect himself. He's afraid that this case will drag them all into it. He doesn't want to get himself into trouble. So what if it is? The four-eyed officer said indignantly. If the emperor breaks the law, he will be punished the same way as the common people. Isn't this a society governed by law? The policewoman's smile became more and more sarcastic. I said you were childish. You really are childish. How am I childish? The four-eyed officer retorted. Just as the two of them were about to argue, Square-Faced pulled a long face and shouted, Shut up, both of you. Stop making a ruckus here. Come with me to the crime scene. The two of them looked at each other and shut their mouths. They obediently followed Square-Faced to the crime scene. Although they had seen the scene before, when they took a second look, they saw that Director Li and the mistress, who was 2 meters away from him, had been smashed into a pulp. The bystanders could not bear to see it. The four-eyed officer looked at the location and angle of the corpse, as well as the direction and range of the blood splattered. He couldn't help but look back at the building behind him and said with a strange expression, Boss, you said that this person's corpse is 5 or 6 meters away from the building. How did they fall here? From what I see, it doesn't look like he was moved here by someone. Could it be that they were thrown out by someone? The policewoman also squatted down and looked around the corpse. She shook her head and said, That's impossible. Who can throw a person who weighs more than 50 kilograms 5 or 6 meters away? Do you think you're Schwarzenegger? Even if you can, look at the way he fell. Is this the way he fell from the 4th floor? In my opinion, if he fell from a plane, he would probably fall like this. From the height of the 4th floor, there's absolutely no chance. Square-Faced also nodded. Yes, it's impossible to fall like this from the 4th floor. He must have been thrown from at least 20 or 30 floors to fall like this. Any criminal policeman with a little reasoning and observation ability could come to this conclusion, but the strangest thing was that there were no tall buildings nearby. The highest building that could meet this theoretical requirement was thousands of meters away from here. How did the suspect throw these two guys from such a high place? Could it be by plane? Thinking of this, Square-Faced suddenly said, Hurry up and ask if there are any planes passing by here tonight, or if there are any takeoff records of the SI plane. Go quickly. The four-eyed officer responded and turned his head to investigate. but after a while he came back with a depressed and confused face. He shook his head and said, "Boss, no. The airport of Tian'an City doesn't take off from here, and there are no takeoff records of the SI plane today. Also, boss, I just checked the video records of the community. After these two people entered the building, they never came out again." This time the three of them really felt that they had dug into a dead end. They couldn't figure out how these two people went up and how they came down. At this moment, Captain Liu of the security team also came over and looked at the two people. He secretly sighed and shook his head. Alas, they were alive and well during the day. Why did they disappear at night? Square-faced glanced at him, then quickly withdrew his gaze and said casually, "Captain Liu, what do you think?" "What do I think?" Captain Liu rolled his eyes. He really wanted to say, "My opinion is that I have no opinion." But his eyes quickly caught sight of Director Gong, who was walking out of the stairwell. An idea came to him and he smiled. "Oh right, didn't Director Gong start out as a criminal investigator? He used to solve cases like a god. Let him have a look. He must be able to find some clues." Squareface said with some surprise, "Ah? Director Gong used to be a criminal investigation background. I can't tell." Gong Zixin had always been known as a nice guy in the police station. No one could tell that he used to be a criminal police officer. Captain Liu took the opportunity to brag. "Don't underestimate our Chief Gong. The previous 426 case was solved by Chief Gong. Back then he was like a god when it came to solving cases." Square-faced and the others originally had some complaints about Director Gong. At this time when they heard this they felt a little guilty and said to Director Gong, who came over, "Director Gong, what do you think is going on?" Director Gong had heard everything they had said before. He glanced at Captain Liu and nodded secretly. He thought to himself, "I didn't train him for nothing." Director Gong smiled modestly and waved his hand. Then he looked at the scene of the case with his hands behind his back and smiled confidently. "This case is very simple." When the policemen around heard this, they were all shocked. They had guessed and deduced for a long time, but they couldn't figure out how these two people fell from such a high place and died here. As soon as Director Gong came, he understood it with just a glance. This was really the case of old Ginger being spicier. Square-faced and the others suddenly became more and more respectful. They were all respectful, like primary school students facing their teacher. They asked, "Director Gong, please give us some advice." There were also curious policemen next to them. One after another they said, "That's right, Director Gong. Tell us what is going on." Director Gong laughed and said, "Isn't it simple?" He put his hands on his waist and patted his stomach. With a resolute expression he waved his hand. "This is obviously suicide." Chapter 8:12. It would have been better if Bureau Chief Gong didn't say anything. Once he did, everyone almost fainted on the ground. What? This person fell from a high altitude, his head split into 108,000 pieces, and he was 5 or 6 meters away from the building. How could he commit suicide? Who had the ability to throw himself more than 100 meters up in the air and then throw himself down? Even if he had the courage, he didn't have the ability. Square-faced and the others' faces twitched. They were already trying their best not to curse out loud. If this was suicide, there would be no one left to kill in the world. The corners of Captain Liu's eyes twitched. Even someone as tactful as him didn't know how to smooth things over for the bureau chief. Even a policeman like him, who didn't know much about criminal investigation, knew that this couldn't be suicide. For a moment there was silence. Everyone looked at each other, not knowing how to answer their superior. A policeman mustered up his courage and asked weakly, "Bureau Chief Gong, how can you tell that this is suicide?" Bureau Chief Gong said slowly, "Isn't it simple? It's obvious that Director Li and his mistress had a conflict over money, and then the two of them fought. First, Director Li pushed the mistress down the building in a fit of rage, then committed suicide." Everyone looked at each other again, their expressions strange. Square-faced couldn't help but refute, "Bureau Chief Gong, that can't be right. No matter how strong a person is, they can't push a living person that weighs 100 pounds so far. Moreover, it's impossible to fall from the 4th floor to this state." Bureau Chief Gong shook his head calmly and said, "Don't you know that a person's potential is endless? When they lose control of their emotions, they can often explode with amazing power. So, according to my deduction, this must have been caused by using too much force." "Using too much force? That's too fierce," everyone exclaimed in their hearts. The four-eyed clerk couldn't help but point at Director Li, who had been smashed into a meat patty, and asked, "Bureau Chief Gong, what about this Director Li who committed suicide?" How did he end up like this? Bureau Chief Gong quickly glanced at him, waved his hand and said, he still used too much force. Wow. This reason was really invincible. It was applicable everywhere. As expected of a detective who could solve cases like a god, to think that he could solve a case. Amazing. Truly amazing. Everyone cursed in their hearts, but Captain Lu suddenly understood. He understood Bureau Chief Gong's real intention. The best outcome for this case was suicide. Moreover, he committed suicide because of a dispute over love and money. In that case, everyone would be able to get away with it and everyone would be happy. Later on, he could use this opportunity to clean up the corruption, clean up the atmosphere of the municipal committee, and make the funeral a happy event. Killing two birds with one stone. Amazing, amazing. Captain Lu sighed in his heart. Why did they say that the older the ginger, the spicier it was? It was clearly impossible for the two of them to have committed suicide, but they had been forcibly killed because the current situation required them to commit suicide, so they committed suicide. This method of flipping the clouds and overturning the rain was really marvelous. Captain Lu's heart skipped a beat. He moved closer to the square-jawed man and whispered, Captain Hu, don't be so serious. Just close the case quickly. Didn't you hear Chief Gong's instructions? If this was not suicide, then what was it? Moreover, it could only be suicide. The square-jawed man's heart skipped a beat when he heard this. He narrowed his eyes and looked at Captain Lu for a long time. His face darkened and he did not say anything. After a long time, he shouted in a deep voice, well, since it's suicide, there's nothing else to investigate. Let's go. When everyone heard this, there was an uproar. Although they all cursed in their hearts, they all understood the spirit of their superior and got busy. These policemen took advantage of the distance between them and the police, so no one had heard their previous conversation. However, Li Yundong, who was watching from the balcony upstairs, heard it clearly. He shook his head secretly. Although he knew that Bureau Chief Gong had turned an obvious homicide case into a suicide in order to cover for him, he still frowned and looked a little unhappy. Ziyuan seemed to know what he was thinking and said, don't think too much about it. China has been like this since ancient times. This is a country based on officials, not laws. Don't expect it to change. Li Yundong sighed and said, I know this. What makes me uncomfortable is that I have clearly gained benefits, but my heart is full of bitterness. Ziyuan smiled slightly and gently advised, well, don't think about it. Why don't you think about how these two people fell from a high altitude or who did it? Li Yundong looked at the little foxes of the Fox Zen school who were talking animatedly in the room. Even Chao Yi and Lu Yuehong were discussing something in a low voice, their eyes sweeping over everyone from time to time. Li Yundong couldn't help but feel a headache coming on. He sighed and said, I don't know. It's so sudden that it caught me off guard. Ziyuan smiled slightly and said, forget it. It's useless for you to be anxious about some things now. If you can't find out, then you can't. No matter who killed these two people, we will find out in the future. For now, let's go back to sleep. Li Yundong nodded and walked back to his room. Just as he was about to speak, he saw Lu Fei-er coming up to him with a heavy heart. She said, Li Yundong, I suddenly have something to do. I want to leave first. Li Yundong was stunned. What happened? But then he thought that it must be because of the murder case. Lu Fei-er didn't want to be involved, so she wanted to avoid the limelight first. He could understand Lu Fei-er's thoughts very well, so he didn't point it out. He nodded and said, well, you can go and do your business first. Lu Fei-er looked at Li Yundong with her big eyes and suddenly said, don't think too much. When I went downstairs just now, someone seemed to recognize me. I have to leave quickly in case the paparazzi come to my door. I'm not afraid of being exposed, but if you are exposed, it seems that it will bring a lot of trouble. When Li Yundong heard this, he couldn't help but feel touched. He smiled and nodded at Lu Fei-er. Thank you, but why are you in such a hurry to leave so late? Will there be any danger? Lu Fei-er smiled and said, it's okay. I'll drive away later. As for Sister Chao. She turned her head and looked into the room, only to see that Chao Kefi had already gotten up. She was leaning lazily in front of the door, rubbing her eyes and looking at the people in the room blankly. Lu Fei-er went over with a smile, grabbed Chao Kefi's hand and said with a smile, Sister Chao, you can really sleep. It's so noisy outside. Don't you know? Chao Kefi's face was sleepy. What happened? I heard it was very noisy. Lu Fei-er took Chao Kefi's hand and quickly told her what had happened before. Chao Kefi's eyes widened and she said in surprise, no way? They're dead? Where are the police? Lu Fei-er smiled and said, They're all gone. Chow Kefi's eyes flickered. They're all gone? Just like that? Lu Fei-er asked curiously, what else can they do? Chow Kefi also laughed and said, that's true. Lu Fei-er suddenly sighed softly and said, Sister Chow, someone discovered my identity just now. I think I should leave first in case the paparazzi come over later. That would be troublesome. Do you want to stay here or come with me later? Chow Kefi thought for a moment and said, I'll leave with you first. As she spoke, she couldn't help glancing at Li Yundong, who was not far away, and her expression suddenly became a little strange. But this was only a slight expression for a moment. No one noticed the strangeness, especially Li Yundong and the others, who were all focused on the previous case. They were guessing who had killed the two people and whether their strange deaths had been done by the people around them. If so, why didn't they admit it? It wasn't until Lu Fei-er and Chow Kefi, who had finished dressing, formally said goodbye to Li Yundong and the others that they shifted their attention and got up to see them off. Seeing that Chow Kefi was leaving, Ao Wushuang was unwilling, but she couldn't find a reason to make her stay. She still had a lot of doubts in her heart and wanted to test her again. Therefore, when she went out, she took the initiative to greet her enthusiastically. She reached out to take Chow Kefi's arm and made a gesture of seeing her off. She said with a smile, let me see you off. Su Chan, who was standing to one side, looked at her master with a strange expression. She knew that although her master was cold on the outside and warm on the inside, she was actually passionate and sentimental on the inside. But even so, when she met someone she was not familiar with, she would never show such enthusiasm. Even when facing Li Yundong, she would never show such intimacy. What's wrong with master? It's weird. Su Chan murmured in her heart. However, Li Yundong and the others didn't know much about Ao Wushuang's character. Seeing her enthusiasm for Chow Kefi, they didn't feel strange for a moment. They just smiled and walked slowly to see her off. Ao Wushuang's hand grabbed Chow Kefi. It seemed normal to others, but in fact there was Jinqi hidden in this grab. As soon as she grabbed Chow Kefi, the Jinqi in her body poured into Chow Kefi's body. However, Chow Kefi didn't seem to feel it. She just held Ao Wushuang's hand and said with a smile, your hand is so cold. Is it because you're not in good health? Although Tianan City is a southern city, it's going to be the spring festival and the weather is very cold. You should pay attention to your health. Ao Wushuang's Jinqi quickly went around Chow Kefi's body and felt that her body was empty, no different from that of an ordinary person. She was surprised and doubtful, but she couldn't find any abnormality. She thought to herself, could it be that the mystical silver fox has really been sleeping and hasn't woken up yet? There was no clue on Ao Wushuang's face. She smiled slightly and said, I've always been in poor health. Thank you for your concern. As for you, your body is also very weak. You should also pay more attention to your health. The two beautiful women smiled at each other. Ao Wushuang gently let go of her hand and said goodbye to Chow Kefi. Chow Kefi also smiled and said goodbye to everyone, and then left with Lu Fei-er. The moment they turned around, a sharp light flashed in the corner of their eyes at the same time. No one noticed that the two peerless foxes were full of killing intent at the same time, and their eyes were full of murderous intent. Chapter 8:13. After leaving Li Jiandong's home, Lu Fei-er had been in a state of excitement. As she drove, she pulled Chow Kefi and chattered. Hey Sister Chow, how do you think those two guys died? According to Li Jiandong, the police finally concluded that it was suicide. How could it be possible? They fell in that place and they fell so badly. How could it be suicide? It's funny. Lu Fei-er spoke quickly, but there was no response from the side. She turned her head and saw Chow Kefi sitting in the passenger seat. Her head was tilted to one side, and her eyes were twinkling as she looked at the street scene passing by quickly outside the car. Although it was late at night, the lighting project of the Tianan municipal government still made the city look like a city that never sleeps. In the forest of steel and mud, there were bright neon lights everywhere. Although there were few people and vehicles on the street, under the bright lights, the city still exuded the bustling atmosphere of a modern city. Lu Fei-er saw that although Chow Kefi's face was tilted, she could still see many complicated eyes flowing in the corners of Chow Kefi's eyes. Her eyes were full of vicissitudes of life, dazzling and bizarre. Lu Fei-er was very puzzled. She couldn't help asking, Sister Chow, what's wrong with you? Then she smiled ambiguously and said, are you reluctant to part with your little enemy? If Lu Fei-er had joked with Chow Kefi like this in normal times, Chow Kefi would have been angry and laughed with her. Lu Fei-er was even ready. She turned her body and was ready to dodge Chow Kefi. She opened her mouth and shouted at any time, I'm driving. Don't make trouble. But Lu Feier soon found that Chow Kefi was sitting in her seat very quietly, motionless. Only the corner of her mouth was slightly pulled, showing a meaningful and extremely complicated smile. Humph, little enemy? Little? Perhaps he's still young in this life, but he's really an enemy. At this moment, the memory of the mystical silver fox flashed through her mind like a lantern. She had entered Mount Wutai to secretly learn the Vajrabuddha Dharma, but because of the lack of Yuanyang Qi in her body, she couldn't stand the fierce attack of the Vajrabuddha Dharma. She almost died of Qi deviation. If it weren't for the passing Zen master Hui Fa who saved her, she would not have the prestige of the mystical silver fox in the future. Hui Fa was the first man that the mystical silver fox fell in love with, and he was also the last man she fell in love with. This eminent monk of Mount Wutai was handsome and had an extraordinary bearing. He had a profound Buddhist doctrine and a good eloquence. At that time he was famous in the cultivation world of the Tang dynasty. He had discussed and fought with the great Confucian scholars and great Jinren of Confucianism and Taoism many times in public. He had never lost and returned with great victories. At that time, his reputation and appearance were not inferior to that of the eminent monk Xuanzang in the period of Emperor Taizong of Tang. In the era when Huifa was born, it happened to be the end of the Tang dynasty. Most of the emperors believed in Buddhism and suppressed Buddhism. Huifa's appearance was like a comet that streaked across the sky. It was extremely eye-catching. People in the world said that he was the reincarnation of the living Buddha, and his purpose was to come to the world to promote Buddhism and save the declining Buddhism. In fact, Huifa was the reincarnation of Manjushri Bodhisattva. He came to the world to save all living beings. Unexpectedly, a peerless genius like the mystical silver fox appeared halfway. She even courted the reincarnation of Manjushri Bodhisattva. As a result, she failed to woo him and was humiliated. The mystical silver fox's love turned into hatred. In her anger, she turned around and killed the reincarnation of Bodhisattva, Huifa. Manjushri Bodhisattva was the left hand of Buddha, and the Bodhisattva was the Bodhisattva with the highest cultivation level. Among all the Bodhisattvas, the one on the left was the most respected. Therefore, Manjushri Bodhisattva was the head of the 8 great Bodhisattvas, and his status was not lower than that of the 5 great wisdom kings. However, the Bodhisattva did the work of purifying all living beings, while the wisdom king did the work of fighting and PK. It could be said that one was a civil position while the other was a military position. Manjushri Bodhisattva was the head of the civil officials under the Buddha. Although he could fight and PK, he was not a professional after all. When the mystical silver fox stole the secrets of heaven and understood the truth of Buddhism and Taoism, the reincarnation of Manjushri Bodhisattva was undoubtedly killed by the mystical silver fox. When the news reached the heaven court, the heaven realm was shocked and the Buddha was furious. What? My most obedient little brother was killed by a 9-tailed fox? Before Manjushri Bodhisattva became a Buddha, he had been following the Buddha, helping the Buddha to promote the Dharma and teach all living beings. Now, it was not easy for him to make a name for himself and descend to the mortal world to have some incense. Now, it was not easy for him to be reincarnated, but he was killed. Even though the Buddha was calm, he couldn't help but fly into a rage. He immediately let his incarnation, the immovable wisdom king, go straight to the south heaven and descend to the mortal world to be reincarnated. For no other reason than to take revenge and support his little brother. Perhaps it was because of his good fortune that the reincarnation of the immovable wisdom king didn't open his heavenly eye and body root until he was 18 years old. He had just started cultivating for a month when he ran into the mystical silver fox. By chance, the two fought fiercely. At this time, how could the reincarnated wisdom king be a match for the mystical silver fox? He was knocked to the ground by the mystical silver fox in a few moves. But since he was the reincarnation of the wisdom king and the incarnation of the living Buddha, the reincarnation of the wisdom king naturally knew the truth of being flexible. The divine dragon could soar above the 9th heaven, and it could also hide under the 9th earth. The living Buddha had been a beggar in the past. Why couldn't he beg for mercy? Therefore, the immovable wisdom king endured humiliation and begged for mercy. However, the reincarnation of the wisdom king in this life looked exactly the same as Huifa. He had red cheeks and white teeth, and was extraordinarily handsome. When the mystical silver fox looked at the reincarnation of the wisdom king, she was moved. Her heart, which had thought that it was as dry as dead ashes, began to ripple again. At that time she thought, if Huifa, this enemy, begged me for mercy like this, I would not humiliate him in public. If he had agreed to my love at that time, wouldn't it be a joy for me to live with him? The mystical silver fox was moved. Finally, she let go of the reincarnation of the Wisdom King and took him with her. In the past, her infatuation with Huefa had been transferred to the reincarnation of the Wisdom King, who looked exactly like Huefa. She tried to change his mind with her true feelings. But what she had never expected was that the reincarnation of the Wisdom King had pretended to be a snake. After a few years of hard work, he suddenly seized the time when she was practicing the 9th realm of the heavenly Jindan technique and launched a fierce attack on her with all the masters in the cultivation world. Finally, the mystical silver fox, who was invincible in the world, was scared out of her wits. Her body was destroyed, and her young spirit fled to the east in embarrassment. After this matter, the mystical silver fox naturally hated the immovable Wisdom King to the bone. If she hadn't been hiding in Mount Wutai and Mount Mao, she would have immediately rushed forward to fight with Li Yundong, the immovable Wisdom King of this life, when she saw him. After all, the mystical silver fox was not an ordinary person. She could hold back her monstrous hatred and pretend to be Chow Kefi without any flaws. It was not until she got in the car with Lu Feier alone that she began to show her feelings slightly. Looking at everything around her, the mystical silver fox felt that the world was extremely strange. She had been sealed for nearly 1,000 years and everything had changed greatly. It could be said that the sea had changed into mulberry fields, and everything had changed dramatically. But the only thing that had not changed was the 1,000-year feud between her and the immovable Wisdom King. The mystical silver fox leaned her elbow on the window and her head on her palm. The smile on the corner of her mouth became more and more playful. She said in a low voice, "Immovable Wisdom King, I didn't expect that you were in front of me when my soul was scattered by you. Now I open my eyes again and you are in front of me again. The two of us are really fated." Lu Feier, who was driving, heard her muttering to herself, but she couldn't hear clearly what she was saying. She couldn't help turning her head and asking, "Sister Chow, what did you say?" The mystical silver fox smiled and looked out of the car. She pointed with her finger and said, "I said, you are going to kill someone soon." Lu Feier looked in the direction of her finger and was shocked. She saw a person standing on the empty road, and her car quickly crashed into this person. Because of the night driving, there were almost no people or cars on the road, so Lu Feier's speed was extremely fast as if she was driving on the highway. Suddenly seeing a person in front of her, Lu Feier was shocked. She subconsciously stepped on the brake and then turned the steering wheel. At this moment, the tires of the car made a terrible squeaking sound, and bursts of smoke rose from the violent friction between the rubber tires and the asphalt road. Little by little, the figure reflected in Lu Feier's pupils was getting closer and bigger in front of her eyes. She could clearly see that the figure was graceful and slim. It was obviously a woman. In the next second, the car was a little closer to the person. She clearly recognized that this person was none other than Ao Wushuang. "It's her. Why is she here?" This thought flashed quickly in Lu Feier's mind and she became more and more shocked. But what happened in the next second caused Lu Feier to be shocked to the core. She saw a 3-feet-long Qingfeng sword appear in front of Ao Wushuang in an instant. The long sword suddenly turned into a rolling iron lotus. Each petal of the lotus was like a sharp blade. The blades flowed and rotated quickly like a meat grinder. The clanging sound could be heard clearly even through the closed car. It was so terrible that it made people's hair stand on end. Lu Feier watched helplessly as the rolling iron lotus platform, like a terrifying cutting machine, crushed the front of the car bit by bit. For a moment, countless fragments splashed everywhere, and she and the mystical silver fox in the passenger seat also stepped into this terrible cutting abyss bit by bit. At this time, Lu Feier's mind was blank. What was happening in front of her was completely beyond her range of acceptance and imagination. She didn't understand why Ao Wushuang wanted to do such a cruel thing to her. She didn't understand what the terrible iron lotus in front of her was. What Lu Feier didn't know was that Ao Wushuang didn't care about women like Li Yundong. She only cared about two people, one was Wang Yuanshan, and the other was her disciple Su Chan. Even Li Yundong cared about her because he loved her. As for the others, hey, even if they were all dead, it had nothing to do with her, let alone Lu Feier. As for whether killing Lu Feier would cause her to suffer divine punishment, Ao Wushuang couldn't care less at this time. In front of the mystical silver fox, she had to kill her with one blow. If she was still hesitant, there would be endless troubles in the future. In her opinion, the mystical silver fox was much more terrible than the divine punishment. In order to chase after the mystical silver fox, Ao Wushuang specially asked Li Yundong for the Bahuang sword before she went out. This sword turned out to be her sword. Although she had already given it to Li Yundong, she wanted to borrow it now. Although Li Yundong didn't know why she wanted the Bahuang sword at this time, there was no reason not to give it to her because of her feelings. Ao Wushuang didn't explain much. After getting the Bahuang sword, she immediately went out of her body with Yang's spirit and followed the mystical silver fox and Lu Feier. It was not easy for her to wait until the two of them came to a sparsely populated place. She suddenly appeared and wanted to kill them together. Her attack seemed slow, but it was as fast as lightning. In the blink of an eye, the rolling iron lotus had already rushed in front of the mystical silver fox and Lu Feier. Every sharp iron lotus leaf transformed from the Bahuang sword made a buzzing sound, like the roars and howls from hell. Chapter 8:14. Just as Ao Wushuang's Bahuang sword was about to turn Lu Feier and the mystical silver fox into mud in the next second, a strange light suddenly flashed in the mystical silver fox's eyes. She suddenly shouted and put her right hand on the window above her head. With a bang, the roof of the car was blown away and a huge skylight was opened. At the same time, she grabbed Lu Feier's arm with her left hand, jumped up and jumped out of the car with her. With a buzzing sound, the Bahuang sword blasted towards the mystical silver fox like a cannonball. The mystical silver fox was furious and shouted, "How dare you? You're courting death." She raised her hand, and her fingers fluttered like a blooming lotus flower. Each finger accurately flicked on the revolving steel lotus leaves of the lotus platform. In Lu Feier's opinion, every rotating lotus leaf was as fast as an afterimage. Not to mention flicking it with her fingers, she couldn't even see it clearly with her eyes. If she stretched out her hand to flick it, she was afraid that her hand would be twisted out of sight as soon as she stretched out her hand. However, the mystical silver fox next to her was able to accurately hit the lotus leaf of the Bahuang sword with exquisite strength and skill and bounced it away. The edge of the lotus leaf was extremely sharp, and the Bahuang sword was known to be invincible. At this time, the mystical silver fox's spiritual energy was far from recovering, so she naturally did not dare to take it head-on. She could only use her delicate skills to resist this powerful magic weapon. However, the mystical silver fox was a peerless fox demon who had lived for more than 1,000 years. The number of times she had fought was much more than the number of times a 90-year-old man had eaten. In today's world, in terms of the subtlety of fighting skills and the experience of adapting to the situation, the mystical silver fox was definitely unparalleled in the world. No one could beat her. Ao Wushuang saw that she had 5 fingers on one hand, flying up and down as fast as an afterimage. She could only hear a dense clanging sound. However, no matter how the iron lotus seat rolled, it could not move an inch in front of the mystical silver fox. Ao Wushuang didn't even dare to think about such a scene. If someone else waved a sharp sword and slashed at her, Ao Wushuang was naturally confident that she could flick the opponent's sword with a flick of her finger and block the opponent's attack. But this was an iron lotus throne transformed from the Bahuang sword. Every second, at least 10 iron lotus leaves could be seen spinning rapidly. Moreover, in this space of less than a square meter, there were at least 1,000 iron lotus leaves spinning rapidly. Although it was impossible for these thousands of lotus leaves to attack the mystical silver fox at the same time, it was at least equivalent to 10 top experts waving sharp swords to attack the mystical silver fox. For Ao Wushuang, she could block one, but it would be very difficult for her to block two. If it was 3, she would just run away. But 10? Ao Wushuang was shocked and thought to herself, the mystical silver fox really deserves its reputation. At this time, her cultivation had not yet recovered, but her exquisite fighting skills were already shocking. Even Li Yundong was not as good as her. Ao Wushuang immediately stopped thinking about it. Without saying a word, she turned around and ran. After the Bahuang sword was bounced off by the mystical silver fox, it turned into a cyan light with a clang and chased after Ao Wushuang. The mystical silver fox sneered and said, "Want to run? It's not that easy." She held Lu Feier, who had been stunned for a long time, in one hand and quickly chased after her. Although Ao Wushuang was fast, the mystical silver fox behind her was still able to follow her closely with a living person in her hand, which made her more and more shocked. In the silence of the night, a few cars would occasionally pass by on the spacious road. However, none of these drivers noticed that above their heads, there were 2 peerlessly beautiful fox demons, one in front and one behind. At this moment, if someone were to look up at the sky, they would be able to vaguely see 2 indistinct green lights in the sky like meteors. Ao Wushuang ran for a while and found that she could not get rid of the mystical silver fox no matter what. She sighed in her heart and said in despair, "Forget it. I'll die here today." It's incredible that the mystical silver fox can resist the Bahuang sword with her body alone. I'm definitely no match for her. Yuanshan, see you in my next life. As soon as this thought flashed through Ao Wushuang's mind, a flash of inspiration suddenly flashed through her mind. She seemed to think of something and said in her heart, no, why did the mystical silver fox take the risk of being crushed and block the Bahuang sword with her body? She knew that if the mystical silver fox's spiritual energy had recovered to a certain level, she would definitely block the Bahuang sword with her golden body instead of risking her body. Ao Wushuang thought to herself, could it be? Ao Wushuang's heart skipped a beat. She reached into her bosom and took out a talisman. Although she was a young spirit, she had brought almost all the powerful magical weapons and talismans that she could carry. This talisman was not an ordinary Taoist talisman. It was the divine thunder talisman of the five thunders spell that Su Chan had given to Li Yundong. The talisman paper was dark yellow, and there were 4 murderous ancient seal characters on it. Heavenly thunder punishes evil. There were originally 3 talismans, which had been passed on by Wang Yuanshan to Ao Wushuang. After Ao Wushuang had stolen the Rinyuan Jindan, she had given it to Su Chan so that she could escape. She had also given her 2 talismans to protect herself. Su Chan, on the other hand, cared about her lover, so she had given him a priceless thunder talisman. Although this talisman recorded the 5 thunders spell, because it was made by Zhang Tianshi of the Jingyi school, its power was far greater than that of ordinary heavenly thunder talismans. It was also known as the Celestial Master Talisman, and its power was incredible. At this time, if she could let the Bahuang sword entangle the mystical silver fox for a while, and then use the Celestial Master Talisman to attack her, she might be able to turn defeat into victory and defeat the strong. Thinking of this, Ao Wushuang had an idea and flew toward the deserted wilderness with the mystical silver fox. After flying for a while, she gradually left Tianan City and came to the suburbs. She looked around. With the help of the moonlight, she could see that there were weeds everywhere, and there was a huge deep pit on the side of the road. She was surprised to recognize that the place where she was clearly the place where Li Yundong had struck He Xiao by thunder before. It was here that the young boy angrily attracted the thunder and killed He Xiao, who was angered by both men and gods, and finally set foot on the road of cultivation. Now she had accidentally escaped here again. Could it be that it was predestined? Ao Wushuang was surprised, but she didn't have time to think about the coincidence. Her body quickly fell, her fingers hidden in front of her body, and she quickly pinched her fingers. She stepped on the 7-star steps and quickly set up a formation on the ground. The mystical silver fox quickly followed. She only took a look and landed with Lu Fei fearlessly. She sneered and said, "You still want to set up a formation? What kind of formation do you want to set up by yourself? I think you are still an honest man. Why did you attack me? Did someone instruct you? Or?" As she was speaking, she suddenly noticed that a stream of white qi was gradually condensing on the top of Ao Wushuang's head. The white qi steamed out of the Baihui Shui on the top of her head and rushed straight into the sky like a beacon of smoke. In an instant there was a thunderclap in the sky. With a loud rumble, the sky was almost shattered. The mystical silver fox's face changed dramatically. At this time she had not undergone the thunder retribution. Although she was not afraid of the thunder retribution, the heavenly thunder was not the same as the heavenly thunder when she was undergoing the thunder retribution. It was still late winter, and the heavenly thunder in winter had no vitality at all. If she was struck by it, she could not absorb any power of heaven and earth. There was only damage but no nourishment. The mystical silver fox suddenly raised her head and saw that the dark clouds above her head were rolling and rotating, converging into a huge vortex in the middle. In the center of the vortex, thunder and lightning were increasing, and an extremely powerful force was constantly gathering in it. The mystical silver fox was shocked and angry. She moved and was about to leave, but she saw the Bahuang pouncing on her like crazy, blocking all her escape angles and directions. At this moment, Ao Wushuang's Jinqi surged all over her body, and the runes on the heavenly thunder talisman in her hand suddenly emitted a dazzling light. She only felt a surging force coming from her hand and going straight to the top of her head. Ao Wushuang pointed to the sky with one hand. The sky seemed to sense her mind and this force and made a loud bang. Ao Wushuang then pointed to the mystical silver fox with his hand. Her black hair rose to the sky and she shouted, "Heavenly thunder! Kill evil!" In this quiet and cold wilderness, an incomparably powerful heavenly thunder suddenly fell from the sky, fiercely striking toward the body of the number 1 demon fox in the Chinese cultivation world since ancient times. Chapter 8:15. The power of the Taoist Master Talisman depended not only on the talisman itself, but also on the caster himself. The power of the talisman was somewhat similar to the 3 secrets in one advocated by Tang Mi. However, Tang Mi's magic depended on the secret mouth, secret heart and secret finger, and the power of the talisman depended on the talisman, visualization, and the cultivation of the cultivator himself. Before Li Jiandong had reached the Zhuji phase, a bolt of heavenly thunder was enough to make a deep pit on the ground. At this time, the heavenly thunder that Ao Wushuang had attracted with her own spiritual power as a medium was really terrifying. The mystical silver fox looked up and saw a green light coming down from the top of her head. At this moment, the pupils in the eyes of the mystical silver fox instantly shrank. She finally let go of Lu Feier's hand and pinched her fingers together quickly. Zhenqi suddenly gushed out of her whole body, and a 9-tailed yang spirit of the mystical silver fox appeared above her head in an instant. The 9-tailed celestial fox was the yang spirit of the mystical silver fox. 7 of her 9 tails were golden and 2 were white, which also showed that her current strength had not yet recovered to the real realm of the 9-tailed celestial fox. Once all her 9 tails turned golden, it meant that the peerless demon fox, who had almost swept the cultivation world of China more than 1,000 years ago, would reappear in the world. The 9-tailed yang spirit of the mystical silver fox almost curled up into a ball in mid-air, trying to reduce the area struck by the heavenly thunder as much as possible. At the same time, her body rolled rapidly, and her 9 tails were like huge waves, constantly surging like turbulent water. At the moment when the heavenly thunder struck her, the mystical silver fox's rolling movements suddenly accelerated. As soon as the heavenly thunder touched her body, it was taken to the side by her high-speed rotation speed. With a loud bang, the heavenly thunder suddenly passed by the side of the mystical silver fox and hit the ground like a cannonball. In an instant, a deep pit was blasted out. Gravel flew everywhere and smoke filled the air. Although the mystical silver fox relied on her unparalleled fighting experience to escape this attack, her yang spirit was almost smashed. Even Lu Feier could see that the body of the 9-tailed celestial fox in the air was trembling slightly, as if it would break at any time. When Ao Wushuang saw this, she immediately pinched her fingers and activated the 5 thunders spell that Wang Yuanshan had taught her. Originally, women could not practice the art of thunder. They could only control electricity, not thunder. However, Ao Wushuang had exchanged yang qi with Wang Yuanshan, so she was one of the rare female cultivators in the world who could control thunder. Learn, she chanted an incantation and visualized lightning in her mind. She pinched her fingers together and soon, another bolt of lightning struck down from the sky. However, the power of this heavenly thunder was far inferior to that of the heavenly thunder attracted by the Taoist Master Talisman. But now that the mystical silver fox had been struck by the heavenly thunder, Ao Wushuang wanted to take advantage of your illness to kill you. While the mystical silver fox could not recover, a few more bolts of heavenly thunder would come. It would be best if she could destroy her yang spirit. Then she would have a chance to win. However, the mystical silver fox was the mystical silver fox after all. She was a big devil who could still beat all the cultivators in Japan and make them cry for their parents. Seeing that Ao Wushuang was unforgiving and had even cast a spell to attract the heavenly thunder, she was furious. I haven't been in the world for 1,000 years. When I come out again, someone dares to be so arrogant in front of me? Ao Wushuang couldn't help laughing angrily. Her 9-tailed yang spirit stopped in an instant, and her 7 golden tails swung at the falling heavenly thunder. With a few booming sounds, the heavenly thunder was blasted away in all directions and splashed on the mountains in the wilderness, causing bursts of fire in all directions. This seemed simple, but without extremely accurate judgment, it was absolutely impossible to do it. Ao Wushuang was horrified. She had blocked a day's thunder in this way. This was really terrible. She was shocked by the amazing fighting strength of the mystical silver fox. This was an extremely strong opponent. In terms of pure strength, Ao Wushuang was not far from the mystical silver fox. Moreover, she could show her fox demon body and entangle with the mystical silver fox, who could not show her real body. Once the fox demon showed its real body, its strength would at least double. This was why Ao Wushuang dared to fight Lu Yi, who was in the Thunder Retribution realm, when she showed her real body in Mount Qingqing. Once a fox demon cultivates to the 7-tailed stage, its thick hide would be immune to the majority of spells. Moreover, ordinary swords and magic treasures would find it hard to injure it. It could be said that as long as it revealed its fox demon form, the fox demon's body would have an additional layer of little golden body. Once it cultivates to the realm of an 8-tailed earth fox and reveals its fox demon form, practically no spells under the heavens would be able to injure it. Only a few magic treasures and a few magic arrays could wound it. Even if it was besieged, the 8-tailed earth fox could rely on its thick hide to defend and charge forward. If it cultivated to the level of the 9-tailed celestial fox, it would really reach an unimaginable realm. If people blocked it, it would kill it. If Buddha blocked it, it would kill Buddha. However, the mystical silver fox was a typical top master who could use 1% of her strength as 100% of her strength. She was a monster who could use 7 tails to fight 8 tails and 8 tails to fight 9 tails. Ao Wushuang even felt that even if the mystical silver fox was only in the Yangshin phase, she might even be able to defeat a Jinshin master. Ao Wushuang knew that the cultivation world generally believed that 10 Yang spirits could not defeat a Jinshin, but the mystical silver fox must be an exception. The reason was very simple, because she was the mystical silver fox. At this moment Ao Wushuang's fighting spirit completely disappeared. She instantly had the idea of escaping. But if she ran away like this, she would die. Ao Wushuang thought of something and immediately controlled the Bahuang sword to attack the mystical silver fox. Meanwhile, she quickly fled in the opposite direction. The mystical silver fox laughed angrily and said, "You want to leave? In your dreams." Her 10 fingers flew and the sound of clanging rang out quickly. The Bahuang sword was bounced away. Her figure was as fast as lightning, and she chased after the back of Ao Wushuang's head. She slapped down hard with her palm. Ao Wushuang only heard a fierce palm wind coming from behind her. Her heart trembled, and she knew that whether she would live or die was at this moment. In an instant Ao Wushuang let out a shrill howl, and countless slender white hairs quickly grew out of her body. In an instant she turned into a 7-tailed divine fox. She jumped forward and barely avoided the back of her head, which was about to hit her vital part. She took the blow with her back. At the same time she turned around and opened her bloody mouth. With a wild roar, she bit at the mystical silver fox. As the saying goes, a cornered dog jumps over a wall and a rabbit bites a man in a hurry. What's more, the 7-tailed divine fox went crazy and fought with her life. Ao Wushuang's counterbite was so fast that it was almost synchronized with the mystical silver fox's palm on her body. As soon as the mystical silver fox's palm arrived, her bite had already arrived. The mystical silver fox's heart skipped a beat. With a sneer, she exerted her strength and slapped Ao Wushuang's body with a muffled sound. Her body fell down. Ao Wushuang's body sank. She turned around and bit the mystical silver fox. Naturally, her sharp teeth brushed past the mystical silver fox's body. Ao Wushuang let out a muffled groan. At the moment when her body fell, the 7 huge tails swept fiercely. With a bang they swept the mystical silver fox's body. The mystical silver fox blocked with both hands and flew backward like a cloth bag in an instant. Her body flew far away before she stopped abruptly. But when she stabilized her body, Ao Wushuang had disappeared. She didn't know where she had escaped to, and the Bahuang sword had also disappeared. The mystical silver fox couldn't help laughing angrily. Well, what a 7-tailed divine fox. Since I've been in charge of the Fox Zen men, this is the first time I've seen such a powerful fox demon. What a pity, what a pity. The mystical silver fox looked at the place where Ao Wushuang had disappeared. Her eyes flickered as if she was thinking about something. After a while she turned around and looked at Lu Feier beside her. At this time Lu Feier was already scared stiff. She subconsciously wanted to faint, but her mind was very clear. Although she was scared to death, she was even more afraid that once she fainted, she was afraid that she would never wake up again. Lu Feier had acted in many movies and TV shows, but none of them could compare with the scene in front of her. Just now, the fight between the man and the fox was earth-shattering, and thunder was everywhere. Even the computer special effects were not so dazzling. Lu Feier watched the mystical silver fox walk slowly toward her, and her whole body trembled uncontrollably. She was very familiar with the appearance of the woman in front of her, but her temperament and eyes at this time made her feel very strange. Who the hell are you? What did you do to Sister Chow? When the mystical silver fox stood still in front of her, Lu Feier finally couldn't help shouting loudly. The mystical silver fox looked at her coldly and smiled faintly. Sister Chow? Do you mean the original owner of this robe? Hey, let me tell you, she is me and I am her. I am her previous life and she is my current life. Do you understand what I'm saying? Lu Feier and Chow Kefi had a very good relationship. An idea suddenly flashed through her heart. I'm afraid that Sister Chow will never recover. I'm afraid that she is already dead. She can't come back. Lu Feier couldn't help but burst into tears. She said in a hoarse voice, "Give Sister Chow back to me." The mystical silver fox looked at her coldly and said with a sneer, "You're really impolite to me. Don't you know who I am?" Lu Feier just cried and shook her head subconsciously. The mystical silver fox's eyes narrowed and she suddenly sighed. 8,000 years ago, even the farmers in the farmland or the children herding cattle in the countryside had heard of my name and knew who I was. But I didn't expect that 1,000 years later, even a famous actress like you who has seen a lot of things, wouldn't know who I am. The mystical silver fox's eyes became a little vicissitudes of life. She said faintly, "My name is Mystical Silver Fox. Remember it." After that, she turned over her palm and slapped down on the top of Lu Feier's head. Sorry, there are a lot of things to do. It's even later. There will be another update later, but it's a little late. Don't wait, you're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.